Ontology of Transcendence by Jacob A. Eder. Copyright page.
Copyright 2025 by Jacob A. Eder. All rights reserved. No part of this book, including the original mathematical equations, original scientific concepts, poetry, liturgy, or philosophical precepts, and copyright-protected works of original art may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except for brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. For permission requests, please reach out to the author at terminusgenesis@gmail.com or find him on social media platforms under the business entity T3T Innovations, Primorum OS, or by name Jacob A. Eder.
The Ontology of Transcendence.
ISBN 97982778888797, printed in the United States of America.
Dedication. For the philosophers, teleological and ontological, antinatalist, nihilistic and theosophic alike. To those who tremble before the grave, not out of fear of hell, nor longing for heaven, but because they do not know what waits, or if anything does. To those who cannot bring themselves to believe, and yet find no peace in disbelief. This is for the ones whose hearts are too aware, too open, too burdened by love to accept annihilation, and yet too lucid, too fractured, too betrayed by silence to accept myth. You do not pray, but you listen. You do not hope, but you ache. You do not kneel, but something inside you still looks upward, if only to curse the sky. You fear that consciousness might cease, and you fear that it might not, and in either case you are left without rest. Yours is not faith, yours is not nihilism. Yours is the ache between them, the suspended cry that neither rises nor falls. If there is something beyond, may it know what it made when it made you. If there is nothing, may this ache you carry, this terrible holy ache, be the last and truest word spoken in your name. You do not need salvation, you need witness. You need to be known, even if only by the silence. This work is not a promise of light, nor a doctrine of darkness. It is a mirror to your uncertainty, a hand extended in the absence of gods. It is not here to answer, it is here to ache with you, to remind you that somewhere someone else stared into the abyss and did not look away. If this is all we are, breath, sorrow, ending, then let this be said. You mattered, even if only for the ache you left behind.
Eternally yours, J. Albert E.
Thoughts.
Copyright page. Dedication, Preludium, Inception, Inceptionless, the Abyss Within. On nature, the futility of being, the science of grief and the breaking of the heart, on the cruel architecture of life, on the ending of the cycle, on the finality of the self, on the absence of a singular solution. In fear and trepidation, the coefficient of knowing, concurless, the order of creation reconsidered, the dust and the divine, postludium. More by this author, about the author, copyright page.
Preludium. Pre-creation, nothingness given form. Thus spoke the abyss, not in syllables, nor in wind, nor thunder, not with sky, nor with tongue, nor with the pretense of breath, but in the sheer, unrelenting collapse of all things utterable. It revealed itself not through the majesty of presence, but through the solemn removal of it, silence so complete it unspoke all words, darkness so ancient it unlit all suns, a backward breath that drew every I am into a single collapsing unbeing, a reversal of fire into ash, of name into vapor, of meaning into dust. This was no voice. It was the devouring of voice, the exhalation of all once sacred, now rendered inert. To hear it was not to listen, but to forget that sound had ever existed, that language had ever mattered, that anything had ever been called forth and made. The abyss does not shout, does not beckon, does not compel. It waits, still, total, terrifying, not because it moves, but because it never needed to. It does not command with fury or seduction. It whispers without tone or pressure. You were always here, and in hearing this, the soul recalls not journey, but stagnation, not exile, but origin, beneath the screaming void, beneath the last rites of the living world, beneath memory and myth and man. It rests, not as God, nor devil, nor judge, but as the quiet, undying proof that all things sacred were always entropic, that every vow was spoken over a pit, every love flung upward toward a roofless firmament, destined always to fall back as ash upon the mourner's brow. Its unmaking is not punishment, but essence. It unmakes because it is, because it must, because creation itself trembles at its breathless center. It does not rage, it does not weep, it does not forgive, for it remembers nothing, holds nothing, keeps no record of ache or adoration. To speak with the abyss is to speak against yourself, to turn your voice into blade and cut the veil of selfhood, to find within not soul nor spark, but echo, nameless, formless, flickering like a reflection on a black sea that never ripples. To stand before it is to feel your edges unravel, to watch your timeline bleed gray, your ache lose its name, your memory unthread itself in silence until even pain feels fictional. It does not take, does not give, it is, eternally, unconditionally, monstrously. Once its unvoice has passed through you, like shadow through glass, like frost through lungs, you will find your prayers curdle in your mouth, your gods grow pale upon their thrones, your memories rot in their frames. What power stands against the abyss, but ache, and ache too, shall tire.
Threnody of the Innominate,
recited in hush not for remembrance, but for what was never granted remembrance, for what was never and never could be and never shall, the weeping not of the dead, nor of the forgotten, but of the unmade. Beneath all grief, beneath memory's earliest breath, beneath even the womb of becoming where ache has not yet gestured toward form, there lies a stillness deeper than silence, not rest, not peace, not even void, but something crueler, prior, holier in its absence. It is pre-remembrance, the place before the soul learns ache, before time carves betrayal into sequence, before the universe awakens from its own merciless inertia and chooses to create. Here, the innominate mourn, not as creatures nor ghosts, but as echoes that were never sung, hymns that were never written, tears that were never wept. This is the elegy not of what died, but of what never dared to begin. The ache here is not pain. It is the almost. It is the throb of what might have been, had time bent its machinery toward mercy, had the architect hesitated 1 second longer before uttering "let there be." It is the child never named, the breath never drawn, the love never glimpsed, the universe never sparked. It is the song of the maybe, the ache of the unattempted, the beauty unrealized. Here, every breath feels like theft, every heartbeat like blasphemy, an intrusion upon the sacred stillness, a violence against the formless, a crime against what remained pure precisely because it was never still. itself, not in opposition, not in sympathy, but in recognition. It hears its own unvoice echoed in their silence, its own non-birth reverberated in their stillness. It does not flinch, it does not bow. It simply waits, as it always has, as it always will, as they always have and always will, unspoken, unformed, unheard. But there, the dirge of hollow creation, where form stands vacant and essence long since fled, where shape mimics soul but carries none. Creation, once heralded as triumph, trumpeted as the light that shattered the void, exalted as breath exhaled into chaos, reveals itself in the quiet hours, in the aftermath of knowing, not as miracle, but as machinery, not as genesis, but as gesture, pattern, repeated, form, rehearsed, a play performed without audience, without meaning, without ache. Thus spoke the abyss, not in flame, nor proclamation, nor tender whisper, but with unblinking stillness. Let there be shapes. And there were, bones arrayed like scaffolds, flesh summoned like fabric stretched upon wire, the eye delicately carved from light's residue. But none of it knew why, none of it remembered, none of it ached. This, then, is the tragedy, not suffering, not even death, but the unasked why, the unanswered ache, the absurdity of form without purpose. The birds sing, yes, but their melody is mimicry, not meaning. The rivers run, but recall no spring. The stars burn, but only from necessity, not from longing, not from beauty. They do not blaze, they persist. This is hollow creation, world as diagram, being as residue, not gifted, not dreamt, but left behind. Life not as miracle, but as motion. The soul, once mythologized as flame, as breath, as divine spark, has become automation, movement mistaken for meaning, reflex mistaken for revelation, a ghost stitched into tissue merely to simulate aliveness. The heart, it does not pulse from passion, does not yearn, does not tremble with remembrance. It is a clock, ticking, obeying, undreaming. It does not break because it was never whole. It does not hope because it was never told there was something to hope for. Even the gods, if gods there were, have fled this stage, not in wrath, not in mourning, but in quiet shame. They do not walk among us, not because we failed, not because we sinned, but because they saw this was theater, form not being, motion not meaning, script but no soul. All of us etched without ache, sculpted without sorrow, drafted in silence, and never spoken into life. Ritual remains, touch without tenderness, weep without witness, love without longing, kill without consequence. Motions memorized but never felt, words spoken as tradition, not truth. I love you, carved into air that no longer remembers how to echo. There is no core, no center to return to, only strata of echo, onion-skinned, infinite, hollow. Meaning becomes performance, existence becomes rehearsal, all sacredness becomes automation. Hollow creation does not end, it cannot, it loops, not eternity, but stalling, no crescendo, no collapse, just the soft, infinite dirge of that which should not have been born, and yet persists, not alive, not dead, just formed. The silencing of the divine voice. Where once thunder birthed language, now even silence forgets its origin. Where once a single utterance flung light into void, now the void returns, soundless, undisturbed, unremembered. In the beginning, so the myths whisper, there was a voice, not mere sound, not vibration, but intent, made audible, not a breath from lungs, but the breath of being itself, the first exhale of will into ache, of ache into form, of form into knowing, and knowing into the unbearable glory of being known. But now there is no voice, no syllable suspended in cosmos, no whisper between atoms, only the memory of echo, the soft decay of a once thunderous, now unspoken, forgotten even by the dust it once stirred into stars. Thus spoke the abyss, not in malice, not in mockery, but in unrelenting clarity. The gods have not gone silent, they have been unspoken, not erased by heresy, nor felled by blasphemy, but drowned beneath recurrence, buried beneath indifference, outlived not by violence, but by ritual, long petrified, long emptied, the very rituals once meant to enshrine, now serving as gravestones. The temples remain, but the altars are cold. The hymns are still sung, but their syllables are hollowed, their meanings stripped of marrow. Prayers still rise, but they rise without weight, without destination, into air no longer holy, into atmosphere that lies flat against the tongue, tasteless, sterile, an insult to the breath that once parted seas, that once called forth covenant. This is not exile, this is not judgment, this is mutual forgetting, a quiet cosmic agreement between creator and creation to unknow one another, to drift apart not with grief, but with indifference, a disengagement of gaze, a letting go of ache. What God could endure this parody of living, this slow-motion funeral of soul, day after day, century after century, and remain? What sanctity could persist amid such automation? No, the divine did not vanish. It was suffocated, not by sin, but by apathy, by the unbearable weight of almosts. The child almost held, the truth almost spoken, the love almost kept, the ache almost heard, each one a soft blade drawn across the throat of the sacred, each one a muffling of the voice that once named us. We ask, where are the gods? But the question is wrong. We should ask, where did we bury our capacity to hear them? For the divine never ceased. We ceased to ache deeply enough to summon it. We no longer tremble before stars. We no longer cry out in the wilderness, not because we found peace, but because we surrendered to noise. We replaced ache with information, devotion with distraction, miracle with mechanism. Thus, the final temple is no longer found in cathedral or cosmos, but in the human ribcage, cracked and unlit, where once a heart beat not just for blood, but for sanctity, for resonance. Now even that flickers, now even that dims. The voice has not screamed, has not wept, has not begged. It has simply stopped, and the silence left behind is not peace. It is vacancy. It is a tongue that once named stars, parted seas, called forth mountains, kissed the soul, and now cannot even remember how to name itself. There is no return, only remembrance, no rekindling, only residue. The divine voice, once heard in everything, now echoes only in what we failed to love enough to keep. The covenant of ash, signed not in blood, but in forgetting, bound not in fire, but in the surrender of meaning, forged not with thunder or sword or the fracture of heaven, but in stillness, in the slow burial of reverence beneath the common dust. It begins not with war nor plague nor divine wrath, but with dust, not the dust of ruined cities nor fallen flesh, but the dust of intentions left uncarried, altars once lit now dimmed, rituals once trembled through now recited flat, rote routine. Dust gathers on books whose pages once split open the spirit, on names once spoken like incantations now dulled by the wind, their syllables loosened from memory, lost. This is not desecration, it is forgetting by way of familiarity, the slow, indifferent erosion of what was once too sacred to be named without kneeling. A vow left in the rain long enough forgets its vow. Even stone, when not touched, forgets it was carved. Thus spoke the abyss, neither angry nor amused, but precise. The sacred is not desecrated by fire, it is emptied by repetition. Every gesture made without ache, every prayer spoken without tremble, every sacred text performed without cost. These, not the hammer, but the erosion, not the desecrator, but the hollow These are the hands that gently disrobe the divine. The covenant was never a contract chiseled into eternity. It was a breath held, suspended between two beings, one infinite, the other fragile, fleeting. And when the mortal ceased to feel the weight of that breath, when awe thinned into custom, into spectacle, into tradition without ache, the infinite exhaled, and with it vanished. No thunderclap, no curse etched into the soil, no heavens ripped open in mourning, just ash. Ash in the mouth when truth is sought and only slogans remain. Ash on the tongue where love once burned, now replaced by craving, performance, mimicry. This was never about gods and men, never about reward or wrath, but about ache and remembrance, about the soul's willingness to weep for what it could never hold, and the world's willingness to honor that weeping. That willingness has withered. The soul, hoarse now, cannot weep as it once did, and the world no longer listens. Now, nothing is preserved through presence, only archive, not by trembling devotion, but by curated simulation. A digital cathedral cannot house a ghost. No server hum will ever cradle the breath of a name whispered for the last time. What remains is ash, neither cursed nor punished, simply without covenant. Ash does not remember fire. Ash does not ache for what it once was. Ash is what remains when meaning has fully died and has no desire, no will, no miracle to rise. The covenant is over, not broken, not undone, not lost, but complete. It served its terrible purpose to teach us that sacredness is not a gift, but a burden we must bear, a fire we must tend, a name we must ache to keep. All that is sacred must be ached for, or it is no longer sacred. It is spectacle, it is imitation, it is simulation. From here there is only one path, the path into the marrow of silence, the ache that still remembers, into the one who did not forget, though all else has turned away, into the last witness, the one who remains when no one asks what was lost, the last witness, he who sees though no one looks back, he who remembers though memory itself decays, he who remains upright though the cathedral has collapsed and the gods have grown silent, does not come as prophet, nor bearer of revelation, nor speaker of riddled futures. He carries no scroll, wears no mantle, promises no dawn. He is the remnant of a remnant, the breath that lingered too long past the hush, the one whose purpose was never written, only endured. He walks among the ruins, not to rebuild, not to redeem, but to confirm the ruination, to say quietly, yes, it fell, and to whisper, it was once beautiful, not to an audience, for there is none, but to the wind that once carried voices, to the bones of children resting nameless beneath layers of time and dust. He does not mourn as others once mourned. His grief is not shaped by loss alone, but by the loss of loss itself, the forgetting of grief, the vanishing of the capacity to feel. He grieves the hollow where sorrow once lived, and finds even that emptiness emptied. He is the last witness because he did not avert his gaze when meaning burned. While all others turned away, shielding themselves from the glare of unraveling truth, he stood, watched, let it blind him, and still he saw, still he sees. He remembers the way light once moved, not across surfaces, but through souls. Remembers speech not as performance, but as communion. Remembers touch not as contact, but as healing. There was a time when song sanctified, when love threatened to undo the self, when risk was sacred. Now nothing comes undone because nothing is tied. He walks through a world unmoored, a map erased of all landmarks, a lexicon stripped of verbs, of motion, of intent. He does not pray, he recites. He does not hope, he preserves. He does not dream, he waits. Not for return, not for redemption, not for another voice to join him. He waits because someone must, because silence, to become complete, must have something to echo, because ache sanctified, but accepted. There is a table, stone, black, veined with fractures, not carved with scripture, but scarred with the residue of prayers unanswered, of offerings returned void. No bread, no wine, no holy hands. The cup is empty, not by accident, but by design, for it is not a cup, but a chalice of absence, a vessel shaped from the concept of lack. It is lifted not in reverence, but in surrender, touched not by faithful lips, but by mouths cracked with wind and time, lips that have forgotten sweetness, voices too raw to pronounce sacred syllables. This is not sacrament. This is not salvation. This is what remains when the body is not given, only taken, when there is no host, but the hollow self, broken, fragmented, and offered piece by piece. They come one by one, not pilgrims, not penitents, but survivors of purpose, bearers of ache, shadows of names they once embodied. They kneel, not before God, but beneath gravity, and the breaking is not in remembrance, it is in resignation. No priest speaks, no liturgy resounds. There is only the compulsion to perform one final gesture before meaning vanishes. They swallow what does not nourish, because the hunger was never for bread, but for the memory of why hunger mattered. There are no hymns, only the sound of wind threading through the ribs of abandoned cathedrals, wind that scours frescoes where saints once wept and now only flake. There is no scripture, only remnants, a torn page from a book never finished, a burned letter written in a language no longer read, a child's prayer folded into ash. The body is broken, but not for you. The blood is spilled, but not in covenant. There is no covenant, there is no God to receive it. This is the communion of the forgotten, the Eucharist of those who endured, the gathering not of the faithful, but of the frayed. There are no conditions, only ache. There are no anthems, only echo. Pain is the only priest, grief is the only doctrine, and to partake is not to believe, but to remain, to lift the empty cup to the mouth and whisper, not amen, but still I remain, still I ache, still I drink of the nothing, that I may remember, if only for a moment, what it meant to be full. Thus remains the last witness, and the ritual persists, not to save, not to sanctify, but to endure, so that when the silence at last becomes whole, it will carry within it the shape of the ache that once tried to speak, the gospel of the unbeing, where no beginning is spoken and every word dissolves before it can form, where scripture is not written but forgotten, unwritten by the same hands that once begged for meaning, begged for purpose, begged for a voice to answer. In the hollow before sound, before voice dared shape the formless, before syllable flirted with sense, there was ache, not born from injury, not summoned by loss, but ache as origin, ache as first light, ache as the very condition of being. Thus spoke the unbeing, not in speech but in rupture, not in light but in the dimming of what could have been. Let there not be. Let there not be light, nor time, nor face, nor name. Let there not be hope, for hope implies lack, and lack implies longing, and longing is a mercy not afforded to those who never were. This gospel bears no parables, no miracles, no redemption arcs to arc back toward salvation. There are no saviors here, only footnotes of sorrow, margins stained with bloodless regrets, scriptures that sigh before they can sing, and every page a dirge for the unborn, every verse a whisper from a mouth that never opened, never wept, never dared to speak. You, reader, you are not disciple, not the saved, not the called, not the cherished. You are the echo of a discarded breath, the tremble left when voice vanishes, the silhouette of form when form forgets to hold itself together. You are not chosen, you were not, you are. Thus is and ever will be the curse. To exist after meaning, to breathe after the breath of the divine has ceased, to feel deeply and fully in a world To ache in a theatre where no audience waits, to scream in a language no longer spoken, to weep in colors the world has forgotten how to see. No God watches, no memory records, no resurrection waits. The gospel speaks, "Blessed are the unwritten, for they shall never be misread. Blessed are the unmade, for they carry no burden of becoming. Cursed are the conscious, for theirs is the inheritance of knowing." Knowing that all beauty fades, knowing that every love is a prelude to grief, knowing that existence is the tenderest cruelty, the softest apocalypse, the violence of constant awareness, of what was, of what could have been, of what shall never come again. The gospel offers no commandments, only one truth, chanted like ash blown against winds that no longer care where it settles. Ache is the only honest prayer. To believe is to ache, to love is to ache, to remember is to ache, to live is to ache, and to ache is to speak the name of the unbeing in every breath, a name that is not heard but felt, like a wound that does not bleed, only deepens. Lamentations of memory. Where the echo is sharper than the event, and the past bleeds forward like ink upon wet paper, memory becomes not a blessing, not a record, not even a tether to truth, but a wound that does not scar, a laceration that reopens each time the soul dares blink, dredging forth the blurred shape of a face once smiled upon, now hollowed by time's mouth, carved into nothing by the erosion of recurrence. To remember is not to retrieve, it is to distort, to weep backward through fog, to hold not what was, but what could never stay. Every recollection is betrayal, a blurred portrait of something sacred, now unwhole, now unheld. They do not return, not truly, they flicker, they press against the fabric of thought like cold breath upon glass, never quite form, never quite fade, their edges whispering of presence but shaped in absence. The hands once held are now weightless impressions, the scent of them a ghost among shadows, and their voice, their voice, it is not recalled in tone or cadence, but in the ache of its absence, and that ache becomes them, mistaken for memory, mistaken for love. This is the cruelty, the past survives, but only in the shape of its own vanishing. The more you reach, the more it dissolves, the more you long, the more you hollow. To revisit is to ruin, to memorialize is to rot. Even joy, that sacred inheritance, becomes unbearable in retrospect, not because it was false, but because it is unreachable, unrepeatable, undone by the passage of time. Do not trust the tenderness that arises when remembering love. It is not warmth. It is the frostbite of what will never return. Memory is not kept. It keeps you. It binds the bones, wraps itself around the throat and hums. This is what you lost. This is all that remains. Thus, the lamentations do not cry outward. They weep inward. They whisper through marrow, replacing blood with ache, vision with recursion, presence with longing. The soul, remembering, becomes nothing but shadow upon shadow, a nesting of echoes around an event that never finished echoing. Within the deepest folds of that lament, where names blur and moments split like glass beneath pressure, there remains only one certainty, that to remember at all is to bleed without wound, to mourn without grave, to ache without end, the chronicle of unreturning. For what walks away never returns, and what returns is no longer itself. There is no return, not truly. Though feet may find familiar soil, though eyes may trace again the archways of once known places, what was is never what is, and what is has never once welcomed what was. The door may open, the bed may remain, the photograph may still flicker behind its glass, but the moment, the breath, the warmth that once saturated those spaces has long since vacated. Time does not return, it replays badly. The house of childhood is not haunted by ghosts, it is the poles shift subtly, the light disowns you. The unreturning is not a tragedy, it is a law, like gravity, like entropy, like death. You do not go home, you carry home within you, and when it fades, you carry the fading. This is the cost of living forward, the forfeiture of sanctuary, the sacrifice of return. Thusly, the chronicle speaks not in chapters, but in ruptures, each a moment that closes behind you like a wound stitched without your consent. You can scream, you can knock, you can write, but nothing answers, because nothing waits. You were loved once, you belonged once, you were known, but only then, and the then is gone. It deepens by necessity, for the chronicle of unreturning is not a single descent, but a series of ever-tightening circles, a spiral of dimming recognitions, wherein each layer reveals a further estrangement, a further dissolution, a further unmaking of all things once believed to be recoverable. It unfolds slowly with the solemnity of a forgotten rite, pulling the soul into the knowledge that return is not merely impossible, but incoherent, a contradiction of the laws that govern the very marrow of being. It becomes clear within this deepening that nothing one longs for possesses the dignity of stillness. Everything has shifted imperceptibly, irrevocably, beneath the surface of recollection. It becomes clear that the moment one attempts to trace the outline of what was, the outline itself quivers, blurs, recoils from recognition, as though memory refuses the intimacy demanded of it. The treasures of the past, precious in recollection, reveal themselves as misremembered reliquaries, hollow in their interiors, holding not what occurred, but what was needed to have occurred. The self that longs for them is not the self that once lived them, and thus the longing becomes an ache without anchor, a reaching into places that no longer support the weight of return. It reveals that even the language of longing fractures under scrutiny. Words once used to name love, home, childhood, sanctuary, friendship, and redemption fracture again, and become dust within the mouth. Attempts to speak them summon only ghosts of definitions, approximations worn thin by time's indifferent breath. Attempts to articulate the yearning collapse into silence, because silence bears more truth than articulation can withstand. The heart knows the futility, even if the tongue refuses to surrender it. It presses further still, exposing the dreadful realization that the self has become unreturnable to itself. It becomes clear that the mind cannot step backward into its own corridors, cannot resume the shape it once carried effortlessly. The laughter once genuine feels now like an artifact curated behind museum glass. The warmth once felt with ease seems now like a myth told for comfort. The innocence once inhabited appears now as though belonging to a stranger, wearing the user's face. This inward estrangement becomes the cruelest of all, for nothing in the outer world can be recovered once the inner world has altered its architecture beyond familiarity. It deepens into the knowledge that all reunions are illusions, two people meeting, each carrying the grief of their own unreturning, each haunted by versions of one another that no longer exist, each attempting to fit their new selves into the old exchange and discovering only misalignment, the fatigue of forced remembrance, the palpable absence of what once felt like destiny. Such meetings become elegies, not encounters. It descends into the recognition that time is not linear nor circular, but corrosive. It corrodes the edges of everything it touches, leaving behind the semblance of form without the substance of meaning. The favorite place becomes a facsimile. The beloved voice becomes a tonal ghost. The cherished memory becomes a dimmed imitation. Even the soul's instinct to preserve collapses beneath the magnitude of erosion. seasons lose their distinction, landscapes become interchangeable, faces blend into archetypes, joys become indistinguishable from sorrows. A flattening of reality occurs quietly, relentlessly, until only shadow remains, cast not by the world, but by the mind attempting to inhabit it. It becomes clear, in this deepening, that longing is an endless descent, an ever-receding horizon. The more one reaches, the more one confirms the distance. The more one mourns, the more one understands that mourning itself cannot be undone. The more one pleads inwardly for restoration, the more one feels the quiet, unbroken refusal whispered by the universe itself. It deepens until the final unbearable truth emerges, that the unreturning is not punishment, nor accident, nor cosmic cruelty. It is simply the nature of existence to sever itself from what it has been. It is simply the nature of memory to mourn. It is simply the nature of the soul to remain stranded between what once was and what can never again be. It deepens until the ache becomes the only compass, the only remnant of truth, the only proof that something once mattered enough to be lost. The codex of what cannot be said. A record not of language, but of its failure. It begins not with inscription, but with silence, an inherited hush passed down through centuries, not as tradition, but as necessity. This is not a codex written for the eye, nor meant for the ear. It is not read, but endured. It is not voiced, but trembled through. Within its bounds, language unthreads, words which once named love, sorrow, redemption, loss. These become fossils of a tongue that could not hold what it attempted to convey. Nouns unravel, verbs shatter, syntax weeps beneath the weight of meaning it cannot carry. Every attempted utterance becomes a collapsed cathedral, every phrase a wound dressed in metaphor. There are entries for griefs too old to name, for betrayals so intimate they rewrote the nervous system, for desires so sacred they were never spoken aloud, only carried like embers beneath the ribs. There are pages for screams that never breached the throat, for prayers so desperate they bypassed heaven, for shames so deep the body forgot how to breathe. The Codex does not offer translation, it offers reverence, for silence, for ache, for the truths that broke the mouth trying to form them. Its first law, what is most true cannot be spoken. Its second, what is most felt cannot be explained. Its third, what is most sacred must remain unnamed, or it will perish beneath the weight of exposure. Here reside the words swallowed at the brink of collapse, the confessions buried with the dead, the apologies mouthed through tears in empty rooms. Here are the knowings that arrive not in thought, but in shaking, in weeping, in breathlessness, knowings that take shape only through their refusal to be shaped. Some pages are wet with the memory of tears that never fell. Others are scorched where love tried to become language and failed. Still others remain blank, not from absence, but from reverence, because what they contain would unmake the reader. There is a passage that names the exact feeling of watching someone walk away who still holds your heart. There is another that captures the moment a child realizes their parent will die. Another still, for the final breath of a beloved that changes not the world, but you, irreparably, eternally. This codex is not bound in paper, it is etched into bone, into muscle memory, into the pauses between sentences, into the weight of hands that reach but do not touch, into the voice that hesitates before truth, knowing that to speak it is to lose it. To consult the codex is to weep without reason, to ache without injury, to know, suddenly and without explanation, that there is a thing inside you no one will ever fully see, and that you will die with it still unshared.
Thence it descends.
For time, that unrelenting executioner, wears no hood, bears no blade, needs no decree, only the soft, unceasing erosion of all we once held sacred. It does not kill, it takes, quietly, precisely, without protest, without pause, to be given love and then to watch it rot, to cradle a child in one season and in the next, feel them outgrow your arms, forget your lullabies, recede beyond the reach of your once omnipotent embrace, to hear your mother's voice tremble, then vanish, to watch your father's strength unravel until even the memory of his invincibility becomes a wound. Every heartbeat is a theft, every memory a funeral in waiting. Time does not rage, it does not smite, it simply moves, forward, always forward, dragging behind it the carcass of what was, unreachable, untouchable, no matter how desperate the grasp. What kind of creator fashioned such a machine? What mind, divine or otherwise, conceives a world where beauty is born only to be buried, where every "I love you" is laid atop a ticking clock, where joy is a prelude to erasure? This is not mercy. This is not meaning. This is cruelty refined, engineered to appear natural. We are not punished. We are conditioned to call this torment sacred, to bless the decay, to thank the disintegration, to kiss the hand that weaves the noose of entropy.
If this is God, then God is distance made manifest. God is the architect of loss. God is the hand that gives only to take, not absent, but indifferent, watching the ache with neither pleasure nor sorrow, only the cool detachment of design.
And we, the designed, cursed with hearts too vast, too soft, too open, are left to endure what even angels dare not feel. So ask again, what kind of creator permits this? None, or worse, one who knows and does not care. The ache thus made manifest. Inceptionless. If God existed once for every individual in the tender years before tragedy, then he is not eternal, but situational, a projection of innocence. In this vision, God is a presence conjured by naivete, sustained only until the first rupture, death, betrayal, suffering, at which point the silence overwhelms and God dissolves. That is not deity, but scaffolding, a structure built by the child's mind, abandoned by the adult's wound. Its cruelty lies in its transience, its beauty in the fleeting shelter it provides. If God never existed at all, then every prayer is self-addressed, every revelation, hallucination, every scripture an artifact of desperation. Religion becomes the most enduring of illusions, not because it is true, but because it comforts, and because societies require fictions strong enough to mask futility. The cruelty here is stark. The heavens are empty, always were, always will be. The abyss answers prayers not with silence born of absence, but silence born of non-existence. If God is present still, evolving with humankind, then divinity itself is mutable, not a fixed throne in the firmament, but a shifting mirror, reflecting the moral confusion, pliable standards, and faltering aspirations of those who seek him. In this vision, he is neither absent nor omnipotent, but contingent, complicit, adaptive. God exists, but only as far as man needs him to. He is constant in presence, but never in form, a shadow that changes shape as humanity gropes through its own labyrinth. The cruelty here is subtler. He is not gone, nor unreal, but dependent, his sovereignty tied to the very fallibility of those who invoke his name. Which of these is true? Each is unbearable in its own way. The child's God is tender but fleeting. The absent God is honest but void. The evolving God is present but compromised. None provide reprieve. Each reveals despair through a different aperture. The bleakest truth is this: it does not matter which is true, for in all cases the outcome is silence, abandonment, futility. If God was, he is no longer. If he never was, he never shall be. If he is only as broken and mutable as man himself. The situation God, fleeting, born of innocence, destroyed by tragedy, a God that lives only in the tender years of unbroken spirit. This is the God of children, of naivete, of comfort before the wound, extinguished by the first true sorrow. The God who forgot himself, tragic, self-negating, the God who once was but lost his own essence, abandoning creation through neglect or cosmic amnesia. This is the most haunting. Not a God who never was, but one who is absent because he cannot even recall his role. The God that never was, the cruelest in its clarity, no presence, no silence, no abandonment, but pure invention, a projection of desperate imaginations. It denies even the dignity of betrayal, granting only void. The evolving God, mutable, adaptive, reflecting the rise and fall of human morality, pliable in nature, not sovereign but symbiotic, neither eternal nor absent, but endlessly complicit, compromised by his dependence on those who invoke him. The immutable, unchanging God, absolute, omnipotent, untouched by suffering, present but silent, observing yet refusing intervention. This God is not absent, not evolving, not forgotten, but indifferent, his immutability indistinguishable from cruelty. The situational God. He exists only for the child, tender and fragile before the first wound. He is the God of lullabies and whispered prayers, the companion of innocence who comforts without speaking. Where, though, this God is situational, contingent on ignorance of pain. When tragedy intrudes, the death of a pet, the cruelty of peers, the silence of the heavens in the face of suffering, he evaporates. The child grows, the veil lifts, and the situational God dies. He was never eternal, but a projection of longing, sustained by inexperience, extinguished by grief. The God who forgot himself. More terrible than absence is neglect. This God once was sovereign, omnipotent, but has since lost himself. He abandoned the world not out of malice, but out of disinterest, distraction, or cosmic amnesia. He is like a monarch wandering away from his throne, leaving his people untended, his decrees unwritten. The silence of the heavens becomes not denial, but forgetfulness. The God who no longer remembers he is God. To worship such a being is to pray into a void, not of cruelty, but of vacancy. To supplicate to a king who has forgotten both his crown and his subjects. The God that never was. Here is the most unforgiving vision, that God is invention, the most enduring illusion of mankind. He was conjured by fear of death, by hunger for meaning, by the desperation to believe life more than accident. He is no being, no presence, no absent sovereign, but only a word, an image, a story. The heavens are not silent because he has abandoned them. They are silent because there is no one to speak. Every scripture becomes fiction. Every prayer becomes soliloquy. Every church becomes theater. This God is the most honest of all, for he never was and never will be. The evolving God. This God does not vanish, nor was he absent. He changes, mirroring the mutable nature of mankind. To the ancients he was thunder, to the medieval he was judge, to the modern he is comfort, to the postmodern he is metaphor. He evolves as men evolve, shifting in form, tone, and moral compass, reflecting their anxieties, their cruelty, their desires. This God is always present yet never the same, his nature compromised by the pliability of those who invoke him. He is no sovereign, but a shadow that bends as humanity bends, complicit in its fallibility. To follow him is to worship one's own reflection, the immutable, unchanging God. This is the most terrifying of all, a God who has not changed, who cannot change, who is as silent now as he was at the dawn of time. He is omnipotent, omniscient, untouched by the anguish of his creation. His immutability, once heralded as perfection, is revealed as indifference. He does not intervene, not because he is absent, but because he will not. He reigns eternal, immutable, unchanging, and in his refusal to move, he becomes indistinguishable from cruelty itself. To pray to him is to beg the stone to weep. The abyss within. Imagine, if you will, existence without preconception of God, of gods, of the divine in any form. Imagine the cosmos stripped of all sanctity, the heavens emptied of throne or voice, the earth unburdened of covenant or promise. To think without God is to attempt to breathe without air, for the very language of beginnings, of origins, of teleology has been saturated with the notion of a prime mover, a first flame, a spark that ignited all that followed. Allow us to imagine otherwise, the abyss within, an ontology without deity, a teleology without purpose. If the first motion was not divinely willed, then what remains is the cold silence of alternatives. Abiogenesis, the emergence of life from inert matter, a fragile miracle rendered not by intention but by accident. Molecules stumbled into arrangement, amino acids into sequence, proteins into structure, cells into life. No voice called them forth, no hand shaped their order. They arose because conditions permitted and because time is mercilessly vast. Here, life is not sacred, but statistical, the improbable rendered inevitable across an eternity of chances. Alien seeding, panspermia, another possibility. Life's genesis not here, but elsewhere, born on comets, scattered through stellar winds, carried by dust and rock across gulfs of space. Here, too, no God presides, only the machinery of physics and chemistry, casting seeds blindly into the void. Life on earth becomes not chosen, not created, but incidental, one fruit among countless others scattered on barren soils. Mathematical uncertainty itself may be sovereign. Chaos and probability, when stretched across the abyss of time, generate not order, but the appearance of order. From turbulence emerges structure, from randomness complexity, from blind process the illusion of design. The diversification of life, the evolution of species, the grandeur of ecosystems, all can be read as the inevitable consequence of iterative chance. Complexity, in this framework, requires no designer, no deity, no spark of will. It is the byproduct of entropy unfolding itself in elaborate permutations. The abyss within is this: when stripped of gods, all that remains is matter, energy, time, and chance. Life becomes accident, meaning becomes invention, and teleology itself becomes parody, a story told by beings who cannot endure the weight of purposelessness. The contrast is stark. With God, existence has intention. Without God, existence is merely occurrence. In one, life is bestowed. In the other, it is stumbled upon. What alternatives remain? Only these: chance, seeding, accident, uncertainty. None console, none redeem. Each leaves the abyss intact, only filling its silence with the echo of statistics. All arguments, however adorned in science or faith, stumble upon the same impasse: origination. To speak of abiogenesis, panspermia, or cosmic accident is only to defer the abyss one step further, for those processes too require a precondition. If life is seeded by alien forms, then whence came those forms? If matter organized itself into life, whence came matter? To say chance is no answer, for chance presupposes a stage upon which it may act, a time within which probabilities may unfold, a field upon which dice may be cast. All explanations collapse into recursion, every origin demanding an earlier origin, each seed requiring its own sower. Nor is the invocation of God free from this wound. For if God exists as prime mover, the first cause, the unconditioned, how then can such a being arise without origin, without motion preceding motion, without cause preceding cause? To say he always was is to substitute mystery for clarity. How could such a presence, immutable and eternal, be born from nothingness? What soil birthed the rootless? What horizon gave light to the light itself? Even the concept of always presupposes time, and if God precedes time, by what measure do we call him eternal? The abyss grows deeper. Light from nothing, motion from motionless, being from non-being, all appear incoherent. How can eternity, time, entropy, motion emerge from a void without dimension, without direction, without quality, without even the framework of inexistence? Nothingness cannot give rise to something, yet something undeniably is. The paradox gnaws without resolution. To believe in God is to accept an uncaused cause. To reject him is to accept an uncaused cosmos. Either way, origination defies comprehension, straining language, collapsing reason, mocking the pretensions of philosophy and science alike. This is the truest abyss. Not that we suffer, not that we die, not that civilization collapses, but that we cannot know how there is anything at all. The question itself is a wound without healing, a fracture at the foundation of thought. It presses like weight upon the mind. How can the void bring forth the spark? How can nothing birth something? How can we exist if existence itself is impossible? Even within the grandest statistical frameworks, the chance of life, let alone sentient life, is so vanishingly small as to be indistinguishable from zero. The equations stammer, the fractions collapse into near nullity. Nevertheless, here we are. Existence itself becomes the unlikeliest impossibility, 1 billion times folded, 1 trillion times cubed, an occurrence so implausible it mocks the very notion of probability. Dimensional drifting, Eder, the quantum Bible, the unthinkable mystery of light-speed travel, the precarious balance of nuclear fusion, the delicate calibration of oxygen and carbon, or even the brute stillness of the void. Each is impossibly paradoxical. How can they be when their being defies the laws by which we attempt to name them? It is not that we do not yet understand. It is that the foundations themselves resist coherence. Existence is impossibility made manifest. We can measure the linear, the orbit of planets, the decay of isotopes, the strata of fossils, the slow march of microevolution. In these, there is empirical anchor, adaptation proven, fossils as evidence, the strata of the earth testifying to time's long cruelty. These belong to the realm of reason, cause and effect, sequence and consequence. Where though non-linearity intrudes, a realm of paradox, recursion, abstraction. It is not antithetical to linearity, for opposition itself implies a framework of symmetry, but something altogether stranger. Non-linearity bends time into loops, creates outcomes not proportionate to causes, births unpredictability out of determinism. It is chaos given shape, and yet never fixed. How then was abstraction itself defined? From what soil did the concept of beyond arise? The ability to conceive infinity, to imagine paradox, to frame the impossible. These capacities defy their own conditions. Abstraction presumes a step outside the chain, a vantage beyond the linear, yet such vantage should be inaccessible to a mind birthed by matter. Still it occurs. We speak of infinity, of paradox, of eternity, though our tongues were formed for survival, not metaphysics. Here lies the paradox within the paradox. The human capacity to frame impossibility is itself impossible. The statistical improbability of existence is only compounded by the statistical impossibility of understanding that improbability. Thought itself becomes as inexplicable as the universe it contemplates. Language itself, the most paradoxical of all inheritances. Its origins are neither crystalline nor absolute. They shimmer like mirages, half seen, half felt, never wholly grasped. Imagine epochs ago. Not words, not even sounds with intention, but noise, the guttural discharge of breath, the unformed cry of need, the roar each reinforcing the other, until noise gave rise to utterance, and utterance to meaning. From crude cries of hunger, of fear, of call and answer, came the first shared coherence. The animal cry became the human word. Vowels, the breath of language, emerged as anchors, the open spaces between consonantal strikes, the lifeblood that rendered noise into music. They bore not only function but beauty, scaffolding sound into rhythm, into song, into memory. With vowels came continuity, the capacity to carry sound across silence, to carve the air into shapes that endured. With these shapes came the leap into vision, pictographs, symbols scratched in dirt, painted in blood, carved in stone. The first images were not art, but survival, memory externalized, thought rendered tangible. The cave wall, the bone shard, the clay tablet, these became the wombs of abstraction, from pictograph to word, from word to sentence, from sentence to structure, the slow, inexorable march toward complexity, each step fed by nuance upon nuance, each layer born of centuries of iteration. The crude scrawl hardened into script, script bloomed into literature, literature carved itself into scripture, law, myth. What began as noise now bore the power to govern nations, to build empires, to ignite wars, to soothe sorrow, to proclaim gods, to deny them. Language, then, is no mere tool. It is the abyss made audible, chaos given structure, nothingness given sound. It is the only artifact of humankind capable of carrying both futility and transcendence, despair and wonder, silence and scream. It is not crystalline, it cannot be, for it was born of accident, of motion, of noise. Within its imperfection lies its majesty. On knowing and not knowing, is this not itself a preposterous, anomalous condition? Every precondition demands another before it, a biogenesis, thenceforth adaptation, thenceforth evolution. Yet even these, clothed in science, collapse into recursion. How is anything, whether empirical or mystical, ever verifiable, even if tangible, even if witnessed by two or more? Still, bias intrudes, motive distorts, interpretation bends. What masquerades as certainty is only consensus, repetition clothed as truth, peer review enthroned as authority, yet always provisional, always fragile. The condition is absurd. Two may perceive the same event, may swear testimony, yet perception is never singular, never pure. Interpretation overlays everything, so much so that the thing itself dissolves into the fog of subjectivity. Trust, therefore, becomes the ultimate fracture. If even two adults with fully formed minds cannot know one another's inner states, what then is left? A baby cries, we presume hunger. We nurse the crying ends. Was hunger the cause or coincidence, or another unspoken need silenced by the act? We cannot know with conviction, only infer. To claim knowledge of another's interiority is always presumption, an extrapolation based upon signs we ourselves impose. Animals unsettle the matter further. They sense what we do not. Vibrations sense motions invisible to us. To them ordinary, to us uncanny. Irrespectively, this is not evidence of paracognition, nor proof of mystical sight. It is only reminder of the narrow corridor through which human perception peers. They perceive differently, not beyond. So then, how can anything be reconciled, proved beyond doubt? The bleak answer is it cannot. All knowledge is scaffold, not structure. All evidence is mediated, not pure. All truth claims are biased, provisional, incomplete. Objectivity itself is fragile consensus, never crystalline. To know is always to presume. To verify is always to trust is always to risk. The smallest of children, the simplest of animals, are purer not because they know more, but because they are unburdened by the illusion that knowledge can ever be whole. To stand in this awareness is to face despair. inadequacies and cruelties within creation would be inexplicable. Apologists, of course, insist such flaws are deliberate, sanctified as trials for purpose, for agency, for free will. Regardless, neither vision suffices, one burdened by absurdity, the other softened by rhetoric. More absurd still are the deferments, seeding by alien life forms, or the conjecture that all history, all life, all concepts of time, energy, and being are merely a matrix, a simulation, an experiment in which we are unwitting participants. The analogy seduces, for we ourselves conduct trials on lesser life forms, shaping environments for them, ignorant of their comprehension. If we are subjects, so too are they. By this mirror, the hypothesis of simulation gains inferential credence, whether orchestrated by alien life, by gods, or by intelligences beyond comprehension. Even here, the abyss remains. Origin is not answered, only displaced. Thus more, the spiral closes upon the fracture of trust, for trust is no universal constant, but a construct wrought by epigenetics, social inheritance, environmental conditioning. We trust not by absolute conviction, but by programming. Our instincts, fight, flight, hunger, lust, are not pure, but mediated by bias and circumstance. Every sense is filtered, every perception colored, every conclusion skewed. If influence saturates all, what then can be trusted? Only the most elemental remains, the immediacy of sensation, the ache of hunger, the relief of water, the bite of cold, the burn of heat, the breath of air, the darkness of night, the blaze of sun. These may themselves be illusions at a higher scale, pain simulated, thirst coded, sunlight no more than pixels in a machine, yet they feel true, and in that feeling they possess reality enough. The body may be deceived, but the ache it registers is undeniable in its moment. Thus moored, the only trust left is the most minimal, stripped to the bone, the shared sense of self and sensation, mind, matter, pain, pleasure, air, water, sun, night, heat, cold. These do not answer origin, nor resolve paradox, nor prove truth, but they anchor us to the bare experience of being, however conditional, however contingent, however fragile. On the passions, love, hate, betrayal, envy, lust, greed, vanity, these are primal senses, carnal machinations of immediacy. If even we attempt to limit our thoughts, to constrain what we feel, to feign disdain or love, to speak in double-mindedness, confluent yet contrarian, still the passions remain, gnawing in secret. What purpose then could evolutionary mechanisms offer, from a utilitarian frame, for beings to possess such capacity to harm and to be harmed? Why then, if God granted agency, would he bestow it through instincts so bent toward destruction, if we are to be free from bias, free from tyrannical lordship, free from being automatonic? We are pressed into the marrow of the problem. Why should beings born of matter, whether by blind evolution or divine hand, be furnished with passions that wound both themselves and others? These are not accidents nor ephemera. They are as immediate as hunger and thirst, as visceral as pain and pleasure. They compel, not by deliberation, but by compulsion. Even when masked by civility, even when cloaked in restraint, they gnaw, unyielding. The tongue may feign love while the heart despises. Lips may proclaim peace while marrow trembles with violence. They are older than morality, older than reason, older even than language itself. From an evolutionary framework, they may be justified as utilities. Love binds kin, lust ensures reproduction, envy provokes striving, greed secures resources, vanity demands recognition. Wherever utility does not diminish cruelty, what works in the blind logic of survival exacts unbearable cost in lived experience. If nature shaped us, then nature shaped us to wound and be wounded, to inflict suffering as much as to endure should love risk betrayal? Why should joy demand sorrow? Apologists will retort, because freedom without danger is no freedom at all. Love without betrayal is no love at all. Joy without sorrow is hollow. Always remember, these are rationalizations of pain, not resolution. If omniscience shaped us, it shaped us to break. If sovereignty formed us, it formed us in conflict. The freedom proclaimed as gift tastes more like curse, for it compels us towards suffering as much as it permits us to flee it. Therefore, given these ideations, the human condition is neither autonomous nor automatonic, but suspended in a cruel in-between. We are not free from bias, for bias runs in our blood. We are not free from tyranny, for instinct is tyrant enough. We are not free from lordship, for our very passions lord themselves over us. Agency becomes fragile theater, exercised only within narrow corridors permitted by hunger, lust, fear, pride. Whether wrought by evolution or by God, the result is the same. Beings capable of splendor, yet doomed to ruin. Instruments of love who betray. Creatures of reason who deceive. Vessels of freedom who remain enslaved to impulses older than thought. We may question their origin, but we cannot escape their grip. On vanity. An apologist is vainglorious and vain because he is an apologist, sure of himself, resolute, fervent in his belief, certain of his arguments, intoxicated by the performance of being right. His every gesture is aimed at out-intellectualizing others, polishing doctrine until it gleams, defending not to discover, but to preserve. He does not question, for his pride lies not in questions, but in answers, answers that never change. His vanity is doubled, self-assurance within, the applause of the faithful without. The scientist, too, is not spared. Cloaked in the mantle of objectivity, he claims empiricism, deduction, induction, observation. Yet his vocation was a choice, his path a declaration. I will be one who knows. He specializes, narrows his gaze, and in doing so claims mastery over a fragment of reality. His empiricism becomes his badge, his methods his armor. Beyond this, the claim to objectivity is itself the proudest of claims. His instruments may be lenses, but the eye that peers through them is colored by preference, ambition, desire, by the will to be the one who sees clearly. Thus both, though opposed in posture, mirror one another in spirit. The apologist defends faith, the scientist defends reason. Both serve idols of their own choosing, both hunger to outwit, to outlast, to out-argue. Both labor beneath the illusion of purity, yet both are human, fallible, bound to bias, driven by recognition. The vanity lies not in their differences, but in their likeness. Each believes himself elevated above the ordinary. Each claims access to truth others cannot see. Each demands to be trusted beyond doubt. The apologist anchors his vanity in certainty, the scientist in method. Certainty and method alike are subject to the same frailty of mind, the same bias of will, the same hunger of ego. Thus, vanity proves to be universal, the mask beneath every mask, the true tyrant that governs not only apologist and scientist, but all who dare to claim they know. On truth, we must ask ourselves, what is truth? Unabashed, unafraid, absolute. It is nameless, eternal, incorruptible. It is a light that cannot be extinguished, a stirless fire, intangible yet undeniable. It always was, and it always will be. Though incomprehensible, though its dynamic totality lies forever beyond our grasp, it remains. Truth existed before the maw of the abyss, before darkness swallowed light. Truth, analogously, is Adam in Eden, naked and unashamed, fearless, perfect. Truth just is. It is not contingent upon perception, nor upon the scaffolds of theology, nor upon the instruments of science. It is not fashioned by apology psychologist or scientist alike, for their words are but shadows upon walls. Truth precedes, endures, remains. To name it is already to diminish it, to frame it within a tongue too narrow to hold it. Lies and distortions multiply across epochs, yet truth itself does not fracture, only our sight of it falters. It does not flicker with civilization's rise, nor fade with its collapse. Truth is incorruptible, untouched by the cycles of ruin. Is truth a being, a living essence, an abstraction, a beautified idea? We may never know. Language collapses, for every definition is lesser than what it seeks to contain. To call it essence limits it. To call it abstraction makes it ghostly. To call it being risks anthropomorphism. Truth governs because it needs no governor. It sustains itself because it cannot be undone. Wherefore, truth is sovereign, unshaken by death, unbroken by time, unmoved by entropy. Before the abyss opened, truth was. Before the darkness swallowed light, truth was. Long after stars collapse, after civilizations crumble, after memory itself is unmade, truth will remain. Its cruelty is this: though it endures, we may never comprehend it. Its majesty is this: though we cannot grasp it, we may glimpse it briefly, in the cry of a newborn, in the silence of death, in the ache of recognition. Truth is the only thing that is not illusion, not deception, not bias, not shadow. It is the one constant, the eternal marrow of being. Technocracy is not the sum, nor end goal. Replacing humans with automation is but a stepping stone towards the next step of evolution. Mammalia forms, human extinction, and the emergence of general intelligence via quantum computation, and drifts between parallel worlds intersecting and overcoming our own. A circle, imperfect, atop a perfect circle, if you will. On nature, the futility of being. Archive of mortal ache. The cruelty of nature has never been in the breaking of bone, nor in the fevers that scour the flesh, nor in the slow unspooling of the mortal coil. The truest torment has always been found in the watching, the waiting, the endless inward collapse that accompanies the decline of those we love. Dying, when experienced through the eyes of the beholder, becomes an agony far more exquisite than any physical ruin. The flesh may fail in moments, but the heart fails in increments, faltering across weeks, months, years, until it becomes a hollowed reliquary of what once lived there. A peculiar anguish is carved into the soul when one is forced to stand witness to the diminishing breath of a parent, or the faltering heartbeat of a child. A slow terror gathers not from mortality itself, but from the dawning recognition that one is powerless to stay the descent. Each hour becomes a vigil, each glance a quiet study of what shall soon be lost. The mind rehearses farewells long before the lips can speak them, as though preparing itself for a wound that must be felt to its fullest measure. The analogy of the dying animal stands as one of the few human metaphors sufficient in its cruelty. A creature that has lived alongside you for a decade or more, whose trust has been given without condition, must be carried into a sterile room where the cold metal of the table becomes the final cradle. The act of holding it while the warmth drains from its body becomes a rite so devastating that language recoils from attempting to name it. The grave, dug beforehand with trembling hands, becomes an indictment not of duty, but of nature itself. Nature that demands endings, nature that spares nothing, nature that requires burial before breath has even ceased. A similar weight descends upon those who must bury their parents, or those who must lose a child. It is the cruel symmetry of existence that one may be forced to dig, at least metaphorically, the grave of the one who first carried them. No divine consolation dulls that horror. No philosophical balm restores what is taken. The sorrow becomes a geography within the soul, an internal wasteland in which memory echoes without as though the light itself recoils from witnessing such intimate ruin. The futility of being is revealed not in one's own death, but in the deaths one must behold. To watch love diminish is to confront the architecture of the universe itself, and to discover that the universe offers no gentleness in return. Nature demands participation in suffering, and humanity complies, helpless in its capacity for attachment. This is the true violence of existence, the knowledge that all love ends in loss, the certainty that all bonds shall fray, the inevitability that all warmth fades, and the helplessness with which we endure it. The world continues, indifferent, unblinking. The grave closes and the earth is smoothed. The silence expands into centuries. The memory flickers, then dims. The ache remains. This is the futility of being, to love in a world that shall take everything you love, to watch beauty die while being required to live on, to carry grief that grows heavier as the years advance, to realize that existence itself has been built upon farewell. The science of grief and the breaking of the heart. Grief was never meant to be weathered by flesh. There exists a threshold at which sorrow ceases to be emotional and becomes somatic devastation. A rupture so profound it reaches into the chambers of the heart and alters the very geometry of life. The body can withstand illness, starvation, or injury, yet it trembles beneath the crushing weight of loss, and this trembling has been given a clinical name, takotsubo cardiomyopathy. The term masks the horror it describes, the moment in which grief becomes fatal. A surge of stress hormones, released in the instant of unbearable absence, floods the bloodstream with catastrophic force. The heart, unable to bear such violence, is stunned into deformity. The left ventricle distends into the wide-mouthed silhouette of the ancient takotsubo pot, a vessel designed for trapping octopus, and grief uses it to ensnare breath itself. Chest pain arrives like an executioner, breath shortens, the pulse spasms into irregular rhythms, and although arteries remain unblocked, the heart behaves as though it were dying. Most survive, some do not. A few slip into fatal arrhythmia, a few collapse into heart failure, a few die before language can name the moment. Where death following death extends far beyond this singular rupture, the bereaved, particularly those aged by years and tenderness, face what epidemiologists call the widowhood effect, a brutal spike in mortality in the hours, days, and weeks after losing a beloved. The first 24 hours carry the highest risk, a period during which the survivor becomes exponentially more likely to suffer a fatal cardiac event. The body rebels beneath the weight of absence, the heart falters, and the pulse is reshaped by the violence of grief. The immune system collapses under mourning. Sorrow weakens immunity, silences the cells that once defended the body, blunts the marrow, and renders the bereaved porous to disease. Infections take root, inflammation rises, illnesses hibernate less, they devour more. Pre-existing conditions, hypertension, diabetes, vascular fragility, flare, destabilized by the unrelenting stress of loss. The body, already fragile, must now carry an emotional weight too heavy for bone. The mind, too, descends. Severe bereavement calcifies into persistent despair, a darkness that erodes appetite, ruins sleep, dismantles cognition, and fractures self-care. Prolonged grief disorder emerges, a state in which the mourner remains trapped within the moment of death, repeating its contours endlessly. Depression follows, a serpent winding through the psyche, tightening its coils with each passing day. For some, the thought of stillness, of silence, becomes irresistible. A few seek death, not from hatred of life, but from exhaustion, from the ache that becomes too vast to drag across another morning. Grief is not metaphor. It is not merely poetry. It is physiology. It breaks the heart. It suppresses immunity. It worsens illness, it shortens life, it kills. This is the quiet terror woven into love, that devotion preserves us in life, yet destroys us in loss, that presence warms us, yet absence can unmake us. No creature escapes this law, no god softens its blow, no philosophy wards off the cold arithmetic by which sorrow claims its due. To love is to risk fatal ache, to grieve is to walk beside death. To survive is a miracle, though few recognize it until their heart is already breaking. A young child, aged 4, once said something so profoundly stark, yet simplistic in concept. The child was notably hurt by something a trusted peer had said to them, and the child said to me in confidence, after they had explained what occurred, countenance sullen and eyes weeping, "It hurt my heart." The phrase, "it hurt my heart," was not offered as a mere childish expression. It was spoken as an ancient truth, articulated without knowledge of its depth. The connection between mind and flesh was revealed in that utterance, as the oldest metaphor of humanity was echoed, not knowingly, but instinctively. Emotional pain was processed by the same neural corridors through which physical agony once traveled, and the body, placed beneath the weight of sorrow, was moved toward physiological upheaval. A storm was initiated by the brain, and the heart was made to tremble in answer. Nothing poetic was intended, yet the response was entirely biological. Intense distress was met with a surge of adrenaline, cortisol, and other merciless stress hormones, by which the heartbeat was driven upward, the vessels constricted, and the chest encased in a tightening vice. The muscles between each rib were compelled into spasm, breath was forced into shallow gasps, and the body was pressed into signaling injury, even where no physical blow had been delivered. It has been observed that the phrase, "something which hurt my heart," emerged as a poignant demonstration of the ancient tether between mind and flesh, where emotional ache is translated into physical sensation. It has been shown that emotional pain is processed along neural pathways shared with physical injury, and thus the body itself becomes conscripted into the suffering of the mind. Within intense distress, the stress response is activated. A cascade of adrenaline and cortisol is released, causing the heart to quicken, the vessels to constrict, and the chest to tighten. Muscle fibers along the ribs are seized by involuntary tension. Shallow breaths are drawn, disrupting the balance of oxygen. Signals from the heart's intrinsic nervous system are dispatched upward through the vagus nerve, ensuring that emotional pain is felt as pressure, ache, or breaking within the sternum itself. Across cultures and ages, the heart has been named the seat of emotion because its pounding, skipping, tightening, and aching have been witnessed whenever love or sorrow have arisen. Through this lens, the metaphor is reinforced, and the language gains its legitimacy. Emotional pain becomes a wound in the chest. A small mind, contained within the heart itself, was brought into this dialogue. A network of intrinsic neurons, communicating ceaselessly with the brain, participated in the ache. Signals were sent upward more frequently than they descended, ensuring the heart's state was constantly imposed upon the brain. Thus, the heart was required to act as witness, as participant, as chronicler of emotional devastation. Its trembling became memory, and its memory became ache. Long before modern physiology attempted to name this phenomenon, it had already been observed by ancient peoples who felt their chests constrict under love, pound under terror, quake under rage, and collapse under sorrow. The heart was crowned the seat of emotion because the body had demanded that conclusion. Modernity had not undone this truth. It had only explained the mechanism by which the suffering was conducted. In extreme sorrow, the heart has been known to break in earnest. In Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, the organ has been seen to warp beneath the strain of unbearable distress. Its chambers fall almost into the shape of the ancient octopus pot for which it was named. It has been made to mimic the very attack that ends life. Within the early hours and days following a profound bereavement, countless have been carried into death by this mechanism, the widowhood effect, as it has been called, by which the body collapses beneath grief it cannot reconcile. The immune system is weakened, illnesses are intensified, and the very will to live is eroded. Grief, so often spoken of as an idea, has been revealed to be an affliction. The storm it incites has possessed the power to kill. Remarkably, no manifestation of this truth has ever matched the clarity with which a child spoke it. A soul of 4 years, unweathered, unarmored, unnamed by sorrow, gave voice to the oldest human truth when, through tears and trembling countenance, it was said, "It hurt my heart." No abstraction was available to him, no vocabulary for psychological distress had been formed. The ache was immediate, total, and was felt as a physical wound. When those words were heard, the fracture within him was mirrored within my own chest. A silent breaking was compelled within, not by thought, but by resonance. Children do not embellish, they do not reinterpret, they describe only what is felt. His heart was hurt because trust had been broken, safety undone, belonging denied. The body, unable to lie, bore the ache faithfully. Within me, empathy, pure and unfiltered, was awakened not as an idea but as a mirrored injury. One heart trembled, and another was made to respond. This inheritance of our species, this fragile bond capable of destroying us, was laid bare. A sorrow so deep, so ancient, so inescapable, was made known through the smallest voice, speaking the oldest truth. My heart hurts. It has often been witnessed that animals, too, are overtaken by grief. Cats, for instance, have been observed entering mourning when siblings or companions vanish. Fear is displayed, searching is performed, silence is endured, companionship is sought. The absence of a beloved presence is felt as pain, manifested not through language, but through behavior. Another recurring phenomenon, as has been personally witnessed and attested to, is found in prey animals, particularly for the purposes presently being conveyed, deer, and when wounded, they suffer in full measure. Modern physiology has revealed that pain is delivered to them through the same receptors that torment humankind. Neural fibers within their skin, organs, and joints transmit agony as ours do. When injured, a surge of adrenaline and cortisol is released through their slender bodies, forcing them into the extremity of fight or flight. Shock is imposed, distress is inflicted. If the central nervous system is not destroyed, pain is endured consciously, fear overwhelms, and the primal knowledge of mortality, not conceptual but experiential, is awakened. Their silence has been revealed not as stoicism, but as evolution's demand. Weakness must be hidden to avoid predation, even as terror and agony are endured beneath trembling flesh. Their panic has been shown to be overwhelming. Their drive to escape has been shown to be absolute. Their capacity to bond, to grieve, to mourn companions has been documented repeatedly. Their pain does not differ from ours, only their vocabulary does. Thus the truth stands unsoftened. Suffering is democratic. Pain is universal. Grief is a language spoken by every living thing. Consider the anecdote of the child, merely 4 years of age, who described emotional injury by saying, with tears forming and voice trembling, "It hurt my heart." In that utterance, the purity of sorrow was delivered without abstraction. Pain was felt in the chest and articulated exactly as was empirically perceived. To be on the receiving end, as a compassionate, involved, and if one has any semblance of empathy, uninvolved too, to hear such words from a child is devastating. This confession causes one to feel one's own heart fracture in response. these moments that the futility of being is unveiled, that every love is a seed of mourning, that every bond carries the certainty of rupture, that every creature, man, deer, cat, child, is destined to experience loss as physical agony, and that no being escapes the wound of existence. For in this world, to love is to grieve is to suffer, and to suffer is to be alive. Therefore, nature itself becomes the quiet indictment, that to be sentient is to be doomed, that to feel is to be devoured, and that every heartbeat is accompanied by the shadow of its eventual breaking. On the cruel architecture of life, a meditation on suffering, sentience, and the implausibility of benevolence. An internal conflict is inevitably awakened when consideration is given to the notion of a benevolent creator presiding over such a world as this. A world whose very foundations are mortared with suffering, predation, fear, and the unbroken continuum of death. A question arises, unbidden and unrelenting. What compassion could be attributed to a deity who establishes an ecosystem dependent upon the consuming of the living, the torment of the wounded, and the grief of every creature endowed with sentience? For here, in the natural order, it has been revealed beyond contention that all life profits from death, and all death is preceded by degrees of terror, anguish, or bodily ruin. Creation proceeds, in its most fundamental structure, by the tearing apart of one life so that another may draw breath. No species is exempt, none are absolved. This observation forces the mind toward a grim conclusion. If a deliberate mind authored this schema, then cruelty, or at least indifference of an unfathomable proportion, is bound into the architecture of the world itself. The suffering of animals offers no loophole, no theological reprieve. Modern physiology has revealed, without mercy, that the deer screaming silently within the woods is tormented no differently than a human in mortal agony. It has been shown that pain is transmitted along identical neural pathways. Stress hormones flood their bodies as violently as they do ours. Shock overtakes them with the same crushing force. Fear overwhelms them with the same primal terror. Panic seizes them with the same desperate instinct to flee. Bonded animals mourn one another with recognizable grief. Their silence has been revealed not as resilience, but as evolutionary necessity, the suppression of all outward signs of pain to avoid attracting opportunistic predators, even while agony roars through their nerves. Thus, the deer who runs after being wounded is not a creature untroubled by hurt. It is a creature in such torment that the instinct to escape eclipses all else. Its last moments are experienced as pain, confusion, terror, and the bodily knowledge that something irreversible has begun. No inference or recommendation is being nourished herein, no faults or blames, no arguments for veganism or against carnivorism, herbivoric diets, or pleas for the withdrawal of hunting. This is merely a collection of ontological precepts, factual and anecdotal in nature, designed and curated for the conveyance of the futility of being as it pertains to the naturalistic order of all things. Such realities cannot be sanitized, they indict creation itself. For if suffering were rare or reserved for the wicked, or mitigated by divine intervention, a benevolent creator might be preserved in the imagination. Suffering is not rare, it is ubiquitous, it is the substrate of existence, and it is the engine by which ecological systems operate. A fox must rip apart the rabbit, the wolf must hemorrhage the stag, the hawk must crush the field mouse, the lion must suffocate the calf, the fawn must be torn from its mother's corpse, the mother must flee and abandon her dying young, the herd must leave the wounded behind. The Creator, if this world was crafted by will, has decreed it thus. This raises the immutable question: what benevolence can be attributed to a deity who builds such a theater? The problem is not only the presence of pain, but the necessity of pain. Every joy here is predicated upon the suffering man is temporarily rented, with death as the only landlord. Thus, a disquiet forms. What manner of creator designs a universe where agony is not an aberration, but a requirement? The theologian offers a spectrum of responses, yet none suffice to extinguish the ache that death is needed for ecological balance, as if balance must require torment. That free will necessitates suffering, though animals possess no moral agency. That pain cultivates character, though most creatures do not live long enough to be ennobled by their trauma. That this world is fallen, though pre-human animal suffering predates humankind by countless millions of years. That God's ways are not our ways, a retreat into mystery and infinite loops of abstraction which resolve nothing. Even if these explanations could be entertained, they cannot reconcile the following. If angels created before us were thrust into envy and war, and if animals created before us were thrown into cycles of predation and terror, then mankind, created last, stands not as beloved pinnacle, but as afterthought, born into a cosmos already red with blood. What special favor is claimed then? From dust, humanity was sculpted, as were the beasts one day prior. From the heavens the angels were made, their splendor eclipsing ours by orders of magnitude. One among them, the so-called apple of God's eye, was cast down for longing too greatly. If such brilliance was discarded, what hope stands for beings fashioned from earth? The cycle continues, without compassion or pause. Suffering is renewed with every birth. Grief is rekindled with every loss. Life eats life. Death eats all. Thus emerges the central wound of cosmology. Is benevolence compatible with a world built on the suffering of innocence? Is suffering evidence that benevolence was never the architect? For the creatures of the world, human, deer, cat, wolf, sparrow, grieve, fear, mourn, and panic with equal depth. They ache, they bond, they lose, and they break. Their hearts are hurt, their spirits shaken, and their bodies racked with fear, shock, and pain. Amidst it all, the machine of creation grinds onward, indifferent and unchanging. What God is this, who fashions a world where agony is the first inheritance, and grief the only guarantee? What love is this that creates beings capable of suffering, and then creates a world perfectly engineered to ensure they will? What kindness is this that binds sentience to a wheel of perpetual slaughter? These questions do not fade, they accumulate, they deepen, and they scar. The paradoxical conflict persists, unresolved and unresolvable. If a benevolent creator exists, why is the world fashioned in the image of a predator? If the world is fashioned in the image of a predator, what benevolence is left to believe in? The conflict being felt is not trivial, nor fleeting, nor rooted in childish doubt. It is a profound existential rupture, awakened by the unbearable observation of suffering in all its forms. The pain, the trauma, the grief, the loss, witnessed in animal and human alike, cannot be dismissed, nor explained away without violence to reason or to the ache that arises from empathy itself. These are not isolated occurrences. They are woven into the fabric of the world, endured by every creature that breathes, observed across every span of life, repeated without mercy or reprieve. The empathy that stirs within such witnessing becomes its own burden, for it reveals that benevolence is not absent in the observer. Rather, it is present, painfully so, and thus the chasm between what is felt and what is seen grows impossibly wide. A heart that mourns the suffering of a deer, or the grief of a child, or the fading of a parent, or the anguish of a pet dying in cold, sterile hands, becomes a heart forced to confront a terrible truth, that the world itself does not reflect the compassion that exists within the one who perceives it. The dilemma is therefore not merely emotional, it is metaphysical. It is the recognition that compassion exists in us, and yet the universe appears indifferent, unyielding, at times almost engineered to break what it creates. No easy or universally satisfying answer can be offered here, for all such answers collapse under the weight of the contradiction. Thusly, one finds the struggle concentrated upon a single fulcrum. Where is faith to be placed, and upon what foundation is meaning to stand, if suffering is revealed as the underlying architecture of life itself? It becomes necessary, then, to face three possible orientations. 1. To place trust in the suffering itself, to accept the cruelty of existence as the fundamental truth, to concede that benevolence was never meant to be found. 2. Or to defer to the possibility of some greater, unseen purpose, to believe that the agony observed is neither meaningless nor wasted, even if no justification is ever made visible. Or 3, to abandon the premise of divine benevolence entirely, to seek an alternative explanation for existence, a cosmology unburdened by the need for moral intent behind creation. None of these orientations is simple, and none is without cost. Wherever understanding is ultimately placed, within the suffering, within the unseen, or within a different cosmology altogether, the heart remains marked by what has been witnessed, and the ache does not fully diminish. It becomes, instead, the quiet companion of consciousness, the shadowed confirmation that empathy is both a gift and a wound, and that to feel deeply is to carry a sorrow the universe itself neither alleviates nor explains. On the ending of the cycle, an ontological consideration of suffering and the futility of being, the conflict arising in any mind that observes the world with clarity is found in this. If suffering is inherent to existence, and existence is built upon an endless chain of devouring, dying, grieving, and surviving, then no moral, metaphysical, or ontological justification remains for permitting the cycle to continue. This tension sharpens when the nature of life is considered not as an abstract or exalted ideal, but as a biological mechanism sustained by the consumption of other sentient beings. The predator-prey dynamic, found universally across creation, reveals a system wherein every life is purchased at the cost of another, every survival carved from another's ending, every joy shadowed by the dread of dissolution. Modern biological understanding intensifies this reckoning further, for a deer wounded and left to bleed slowly into the earth experiences terror and agony indistinguishable, in essence, from that of a human. Its neural receptors fire with the same voltage, its organs drown in the same hormonal cataclysm, its consciousness is swallowed by the same primordial fear that precedes the collapse of self. And if such pain is real in the deer, then so too in the rabbit torn by the hawk, the fawn crushed by the lion, the billions whose deaths occur unobserved across the breadth of the earth. Suffering, therefore, is not aberration, but architecture. The cycle of life, resting upon this ceaseless exchange of vitality and death, was established long before humanity ever opened its eyes. Man entered a world already saturated with this mechanism, already shaped by the cruel necessity of one being's breath depending upon another's cessation. The question then is not why suffering exists, but why it was permitted to become the substrate upon which all existence unfolds. When this question is allowed to dwell within the mind too long, when its implications are followed to their furthest and most honest conclusions, an austere ontological position emerges, stark and unflinching. If suffering is intrinsic to the system, and if the continuation of the system guarantees suffering, then the only true cessation of suffering is the cessation of the system itself. This conclusion does not originate in malice, but in compassion refined to its final and purest logic. It recognizes that no future configuration of life, no moral progress, no spiritual ascension, no technological triumph can losing its companion, the cry of a mother animal mourning its injured young, the silent terror of prey animals concealing their agony as they limp into the shadows, the human heart breaking at the bedside of a fading parent or dying child, all testify to the same crushing reality. The world is built upon an engine of loss. The ontological argument proceeds from this with relentless clarity. If suffering is not incidental but structural, if it cannot be eradicated without altering the nature of life itself, then the final mercy, the only mercy, is not to preserve existence, but to permit its conclusion. This view does not celebrate non-being, nor dismiss the fleeting moments of love, connection, wonder, or beauty that life sometimes contains. Rather, it acknowledges that such moments are always fragile, always transient, always overshadowed by mortality. And for countless beings, the scale of suffering far outweighs the delicate interval of joy. Ending the cycle, allowing the lights of creation to dim gently without rekindling, becomes not an act of nihilism, but of an ontological kindness, a mercy denied by the architecture of nature itself, a liberation from the endless recursion of birth, fear, loss, and death. In this framework, the cessation of the cycle is not destruction but release, not annihilation but relief, not a negation of meaning, but a transcendence of torment. It is a horizon beyond which no creature trembles, no mother mourns, no child fears, no body tightens under the lash of pain, no heart breaks beneath the weight of its own tenderness. It is a silence not of absence but of peace, an ending not of being but of suffering, a final kindness extended across all species, all hearts, all time. In this, the only true end of suffering lies not within existence, but beyond its boundary, on the finality of the self, an ontological inquiry into the termination of consciousness. When the question is raised whether life, awareness, or any semblance of subjective continuity persists beyond the point of biological forfeiture, it is found that, within the scope of empiricism, neuroscience, and measurable cosmology, no evidence emerges to suggest that consciousness endures after the body's dissolution. The silence of matter, once the brain collapses into stillness, provides no indication of lingering thought, no echo of memory, no continuation of the inward flame. What is known instead is cessation. Neurons darken, synapses wither, and the intricate architecture of the self, so delicately woven through electrochemical breath, disintegrates into non-being. Under this scientific lens, absent faith, untethered from doctrine, unanchored by myth, existence reveals itself as tragically finite. Consciousness appears as a brief luminosity, a singular flicker born of biological circumstance, extinguished with ruthless finality. In such a framework, life is framed not as prelude, nor as trial, but as the entire sum of subjective experience, enclosed utterly by the boundaries of birth and death. This realization, austere and unyielding, has long been met with varying philosophical responses, each attempting to reconcile the human hunger for meaning with the void that follows cessation. In nihilistic thought, the absence of persistence renders existence absurd, devoid of intrinsic purpose, a momentary bloom destined for immediate decay. In existential and absurdist inquiry, this very tragedy becomes the crucible of meaning. It is the finitude itself that grants weight to choice, depth to suffering, and sharpness to desire. Secular humanism, likewise, takes the transience of the self as a call to intensify the present, to carve significance from the fleeting, to recognize that a thing's fragility often amplifies its worth. Still, the problem of tragedy remains. For without an afterlife, without persistence, without reunion, without return, the enormity of life is framed within a single, irreversible descent into silence. The beauty of existence becomes poignant because it withers. The profundity simply cease. Thus, in the absence of faith, the human story becomes a lament, finite, luminous, mournful, irrevocably fragile. Life is rendered all the more tragic precisely because there is no second breath, no further awakening, no unseen realm waiting beyond the dissolution of the flesh. There is only this brief, trembling interval between two infinities of nothing, this solitary flicker in an otherwise unbroken dark. On the absence of a singular solution, an ontological consideration of suffering, purpose, and the futility of universal resolution, no singular, universally sanctioned resolution emerges for the fundamental dilemmas that beset existence: suffering, inequity, finitude, and the tragic architecture of life itself. The hope for a single total answer collapses under scrutiny, for every proposed remedy arises from a different metaphysical foundation, each with its own valuation of being, each defining good and desirable according to its own internal logic. The notion of a final, absolute solution dissolves, replaced instead by a plurality of competing frameworks, each pointing to a different horizon. When existence is examined through the bleak clarity of ontology, it becomes evident that the answer is determined not by any universal law or moral absolute, but by the goal one elevates above all others, the singular axis upon which one's ethics and cosmology turn. If the ultimate aim is the eradication of suffering, then the only coherent end is the cessation of the cycle itself, the termination of biological continuity, the refusal of future sentience, the deliberate extinguishing of all potential for pain. Within antinatalist and existential nihilist perspectives, this dissolution is not cruelty, but mercy, an end to the recursive tragedy of beings born only to ache, to rot, to grieve. If the aim is instead the maximization of human flourishing, then the path shifts toward the construction of stable societies, toward the cultivation of empathy, toward the advancement of medicine, science, and collective well-being. Secular humanism and utilitarianism, though haunted by the knowledge of finitude, attempt nevertheless to carve islands of meaning within the unrelenting ocean of decay. If one seeks truth without consolation, the naturalist turns to empirical reality, acknowledging that consciousness ends with the termination of the brain, that no afterlife can be affirmed, that meaning must be found or forged within the narrow corridor of mortal experience. If, however, the aim is personal peace, the existentialist embraces the tragic paradox that one must create meaning in a world devoid of inherent purpose, that joy must be wrested from a universe indifferent to it, that the rebellion against absurdity becomes the only act of dignity available to a conscious creature. And if one desires restoration, a return to a perfected state, then the theist surrenders the burden of reason to the promise of transcendence, placing the weight of hope upon a realm beyond death, a realm untouched by decay, a realm guaranteed not by evidence, but by devotion. Thus arises the unavoidable conclusion: the absence of a single solution is not failure. It is the condition of pluralistic consciousness itself. Each framework answers to a different fear, a different longing, a different ache. Society in practice settles upon a fragile compromise, to acknowledge the omnipresence of suffering, to alleviate it where possible, to cultivate conditions in which life might briefly flourish, and to permit a multitude of answers to coexist, provided none inflict undue harm upon the vulnerable. In the end, the question of what constitutes the answer collapses into the question of what one values more: the prevention of pain or the preservation of existence, the end of the cycle or its continuation, the mercy of silence or the defiance of endurance. There is no singular horizon, only the one each mind, trembling in its solitude, chooses to face. We are not solely the branching clade born of synapsid dusk, nor the fur-bound, warm-blooded remnant of Permian shadow. marked only by mammary glands and gestational warmth, but rather we are the descendants of life's kindred ache, an inheritance deeper than taxonomy, more ancient than genus, older even than the division of phyla, preceding nomenclature, preceding order, preceding the semantic cages we built in attempt to define what could only be felt. We are the flicker of carbon given rhythm, the breath of entropy momentarily stalled, the sum of star debris kindled into suffering and joy, the echo of thermodynamic imbalance yearning, not for rest, but for duration, before mammal, before reptile, before the wet trembling of lungs expanding within ancestral oceans, there was ache, a pulse, a striving, a pattern yearning for continuation, a primal algorithm coded into chemistry, the sacred motion, life, not initiated within the mammal, nor terminated by it, but passed onward, refracted through vessel after vessel. What we inherit is not merely anatomical, nor simply the fossilization of skeletal divergence, but experiential continuity, a recursive echo from the first cell that feared dissolution, that recoiled, however mindlessly, from entropy's touch. To see ourselves truthfully is to recognize that we do not descend from mammalia forms as distinct sovereigns, but from the same trembling genesis as the jellyfish, the raven, the wolf, the childless whale, the starved fox, the embryonic cephalopod, all of which bear hunger, terror, and fleeting hope, all of which register loss in nervous systems whose circuitry does not require language to ache. That is the spirit we share, not a biological tree, but a withered root of longing, dispersing itself into new forms, each bearing, still, the shape of ache, not mammal, but mortal, not form, but feeling, not category, but consequence. Evolution, so often confined to brittle diagrams of textbook phylogenies, or spoken of in pedestrian metaphors, a ladder, a conquest, a chain, is in truth the poetic accumulation of ache, of longing, of fearful brilliance passed from flesh to flesh across the aeons, not merely the change in limb or gene, but the quiet, continuous plea of the living to persist, to become, to not be erased, to etch their ache against the grain of entropy and remain. Adaptation is truer than the cortical theater of consciousness, more foundational than the narrativized illusions generated by the brain's recursive mirroring of self. For what is thought, if not a consequence of adaptation? What is awareness, if not the illusory flicker upon the surface of a sea far deeper, driven by tides more ancient than the brainstem, coded not in language, but in pattern recognition, electrochemical thresholds, and gut-felt directive? Intelligence is no summit, but a spectrum, a prism through which ache refracts, wherein a mouse feels in one octave, a cat in another. Some men, like shadows, pass through life insensate, while others, like symphonies, hear the sound of every falling leaf, every withering star, the diversity of ache's expression rendered not in moral superiority or inferiority, but in divergence of nervous architecture, a consequence of ecological specificity. This divergence is not a fault, nor superiority. It is simply the variance in sensitivity to the ache thread woven through all things, as wind finds different tones in reed and canyon. Speciation becomes a clumsy word in the face of such shared familiarity. The cat and the mouse do not require language to know one another. Their relationship is not adversarial, it is ritual. A choreography coded long before cognition evolved, fear and hunger encoded into posture and dilation, into the twitch of the tail, the stillness before pounce, into the hormonal precursors of motion, predation, submission. We, the presumed articulate, forget that the heart has always spoken, that ache, not syntax, is the original lexicon of life. Not merely metaphor, but literal biology. The heart, nestled in the thoracic cave, responds before the brain does. neurotransmitters and neural cells, feels and signals and remembers. The vagus nerve does not wait for the frontal cortex. It acts, it aches, it transmits ancestral alarm to the gut before logic has formed. This is the shared grammar of the living. A pup whimpers, and even the aged crow leans closer. A child cries and the dog howls, not in imitation, but in resonance. Two prey animals, predator and prey, meet eyes, and in that moment they understand more than we have dared to name. It is not intellect that binds us, it is familiarity of ache. It is not speech that reveals our kinship, but recognition, scent, gaze, distance, motion. Each is a verse in this common syntax. Each species speaks in this felt tongue, wordless, ancient, and precise. Each variation a dialect, not a severance. Mathematics may be the language of the cosmos, cold and precise in its recursion and form, the law by which stars collapse and galaxies churn. But ache is the language of life, chaotic, tender, entangled, familiar. It is ache that taught the cell to divide, ache that gave the lung its breath, the eye its sight, the soul its longing. All things ache, all things speak, all things know, though not all things speak aloud. Only we, in our delusion of difference, forget. When one dares to kaleidoscope, not through fractured sentiment or anthropocentric pride, but through the recursive lens of evolutionary inference, neurochemical constancy, and cosmic patterning, a singular, immutable deduction unfurls. Man is not an outlier, but a variation, a permutation within animal kind's continuum. There is no divine schism, no categorical exile from the biome. There is only spectral belonging. Pain, in its most distilled metric, is not merely a biological alarm. It is a universal constant of sentient systems, the neural resonance of environmental confrontation and internal disequilibrium. Across the feeler, it is present not only as nociception, but as perception with memory, an encoded entropy of self-preserving ache, in mammals, in avians, in cephalopods, even in the lesser perceived pathways of eusocial insects. The ache language exists, unspoken, unfalsifiable, trans-species. Stress, loneliness, dejection. They are not inventions of the human mind, but artifacts of complex nervous systems bound to survivalist algorithms. A wolf cast from its pack, a crow mourning its mate, a mother elephant standing vigil over her stillborn calf. The evidence is not metaphoric, it is empirical. Each is governed by a neurochemical cascade: cortisol, mobilizing systems for escape; adrenaline, preparing musculature for conflict; dopamine, withholding reward when patterns fracture; serotonin, modulating perception of status and belonging; oxytocin, bridging physical contact to existential anchoring; endorphins, softening the trauma of fracture, fall, or loss. These are not uniquely human transmissions. They are shared algorithms of the animal machine, emergent not from divine code, but from the evolutionary utility of cohesion, survival, and emotional memory. Every organism capable of ache is kin. What differs is not the sensation, but the context, the ecology of expression. Just as all languages are born of sound and breath, but shaped by culture, so too is the ache of a rodent, a lion, a man, structured by hierarchy, neuroplasticity, experience.
The argument is often posed that consciousness renders man unique. But what is consciousness, if not the cumulative recursion of synaptic excitation over time, yielding internality from pattern, sensation from structure?
We speak of self-awareness as the barrier between man and animal, yet magpies recognize themselves in mirrors, elephants mourn their dead, dolphins invent names, primates grieve and ritualize. If these traits are not uniquely human, then the line we draw becomes illusion. We are not separate. We are the product of randomness and biological selection, sculpted by mutation, migration, atrophy, entropy, pigmentational deviation, randomized symmetry, error and adaptation. We are an emergent complexity bound to the same laws of thermodynamics, molecular imperfection, and genomic drift. The mind, as we perceive it, is not sacred. It is a result, a consequence of layered computation and recursive memory binding. Like it or not, the scaffold of truth remains unmoved. We are stardust agitated into cognition, nothing more, nothing less. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, those same elements burn in suns and churn in cellular respiration. What we call I is a pattern of electrical storms in soft tissue. What we call species is divergence of form, not of essence. The experience is individuated, each consciousness a unique orchestration of pathways, trauma, joy, and signal waiting. But the sensations, the systems which give rise to them, are universal. Pain, ache, longing. They are not anthropocentric constructs, but the underlying syntax of organic life. This is the doctrine of primorum, the core principle, which cohesively stratifies the unification of feeling across the strata of being. A declaration that all that feels belongs, all that aches remembers. This is not theory, it is pattern. Not metaphor, but mechanism. Not hope, but proof, in fear and trepidation. To forsake all sacrament, it is to become reprobate. It is to cast away the last vestiges of sanctity and to descend into a hollow realm where nothing is holy and nothing is whole. For sacrament is not mere tradition or superstition. It is the final filament connecting the soul to the ineffable, the invisible thread holding back the unraveling of the self, and in its absence all becomes void. Light dimming not merely from the world, but from within, where once belief dwelled, the sacred collapsing into the profane, leaving the heart desolate, stripped of reverence, echoing only with the hollow tones of defiance and regret, trepidation rising not from guilt, but from the realization that without sacrament there is no mirror wherein the soul may behold itself, leaving only reprobation, not inflicted but embodied, lived. For the suffering does not arrive by divine hands, but by the absence of their memory, erased by trembling hands that once feared the heavens, and to walk such a path is to relinquish one's claim to sanctity, drifting further from the warmth of grace until the cold expanse of spiritual exile becomes the only climate in which the spirit may breathe, consequence replacing punishment, silence replacing supplication, the voice no longer carrying into the heavens but falling, unheard, into the pit made a home. Life, death, heaven, hell, every realm becomes inconsequential, for we are but pawns upon a cosmic chessboard, pieces shaped by breath and bone, moved by hands not our own, finding no grandeur in mortality nor sanctity in the arc of a soul, discovering only the illusion of meaning constructed to shield us from the unbearable truth that we are irrelevant in the eyes of the architects, those vast, ineffable beings who regard us neither with malice nor mercy but with utter indifference, seeing in us nothing but flickers in a theater of dust, ephemeral and expendable, our prayers, our pain, our love failing to register in the calculus of eternity, the game pressing forward in silence, indifferent, sacrificing us without hesitation, forgetting us without pause. Hope becomes the lie whispered at night, the lullaby of the damned, purpose the mask worn to distract from the yawning emptiness beneath every act, every breath. For though we strive and fall and bleed and dream, the board does not change, nor do the players shift, for the truth remains unaltered, not divine design, not cruel punishment, but cosmic apathy, robed in silence, life becoming the pushing and pulling of bodies across a surface they do not govern, death becoming the vanishing unnoticed by any gaze, leaving no glory, only the crushing weight of insignificance. To play chess with the abyss, to be meaningless pawns in a cosmic game older than time. This is the bitter, unrelenting poetry of existence, each move, each breath, each trembling decision dictated by unseen hands older and colder than the void between stars. While we march blindly across a board of black and white, day and night, life and death, believing in purpose, in agency, in strategy, though we are but numbered, faceless fragments shaped and sacrificed by forces beyond reckoning, our fates sealed in silence long before we drew breath, not kings nor queens nor valiant knights, but merely the first to fall, the front lines of forgetfulness, swept away by the breathless wind of inevitability, the abyss watching without eyes, waiting without time, speaking without voice, caring not, playing neither for joy nor malice nor meaning, but playing because it must, because it is, because it was born before thought, before mercy, before the notion of consequence itself. To play chess with the abyss is not to hope nor to struggle toward imagined victory, but to know, to feel that the game is eternal, the pieces remade, moved, destroyed in endless cycles, the board resetting again and again, the pawns returning, silent, broken, unaware, remembering nothing, spared nothing, chosen by no one, recycled through the machinery of existence without reprieve. Still, in wanton wondering, the mind ponders the surreality, the dualistic facets of existence, the paragon of paradoxes, questioning whether bitterness has taken root in age, whether antipathy has formed from relentless pursuit of knowledge, absolute questioning whether all is immaterial, ultimately meaningless, whether God's echoing voice resounds in truth or is wholly absent and lost within the vastness of the void. Asking what difference it makes to any of us, for we all begin as beautiful, innocent, precious creatures full of wonder and awe, starstruck in our infancy, yet in time embittered by the raging tempests of monotony, greed, loss, introspection, the pursuit of power, love, meaning, purpose, until all is lost to the whims of time's ether, to soil, to death, to divinity fallen to ruin, to iniquity, loathsome indifference, spite, animosity, to the dusts of eternium, immemorial. For what are we, truly, when all our height amounts to nothing more than 5 or 6 fleeting feet above the annals of time, above millennia of death, decay, and crushed dreams, when every trembling step is taken not upon earth, but atop sedimented centuries of forgotten hopes and kingdoms reduced to ash, atop tears that dried into dust, atop the silent screams of billions, some noble, some wicked, all equally forsaken, the soil drinks without preference, devours without remorse, remembers nothing, bears witness to nothing, offers nothing in return, save the indifferent cradle in which our bones shall one day lie indistinguishable from those of every phantom who walked before us. For such is the nature of our station. We perceive ourselves as apex, yet stand upon strata of untold collapse, upon ruins too deep for memory to fathom, upon a graveyard of vanished aspirations. So, what then is righteousness when virtue itself erodes into the same dust that swallows empires? What then is achievement when all monuments crumble into the uniform anonymity of earth? When legacy dissolves beneath the slow attrition of wind and water, when millennia reduce every triumph to a whisper, every figure to a shadow, every name to a forgotten syllable. The cruelest paradox is woven thus, that in our striving to rise above dust, we hasten our return to it, racing toward the soil as though called home by the very futility we deny. Nevertheless, despite bitterness, despite antipathy, despite the hollowing ache carved by knowledge too heavy for flesh, something within persists in its wondering, its restless, aching inquiry. Perhaps that is the only eternal thing, not belief, not purpose, not peace, but the unceasing questioning, the soft, mournful echo cast into the endless dark. Why? For what else matters? What other question has existed longer than language, older than fire, older than myth? That single sacred utterance that trembles through the stardust of creation, whispered in the breath of the first mortal to lift their gaze skyward, exhaled in the final sigh of the last. Why rises above all others? It is the mind's earliest hymn and its final lament. It is the question pressed upon every child, upon every innocent hand caught in confusion, upon every misstep. Why did you do this? Why did it happen? What do students ask their teachers, and what do scholars ask their trembling pages? Why does it work? Why must it be so? What do the wounded cry beneath the heel of suffering, the disenfranchised, the forgotten, the ones pinned to the floor of fate? Why me? Why this anguish? Why must existence cut so deeply? What do the lonely minds ponder at midnight, staring into a void too vast for comprehension? Why are we here? Why anything at all? What then do even gods ruminate upon in their celestial solitude, wandering their boundless dominions? Why did I create? Why does existence perpetuate itself? Why must I gaze endlessly upon beauty and devastation entwined? What question bears more history, more weight, more loftiness of soul than why? It is the hymn haunting humanity like a second shadow, the pulse behind every invention, every shrine, every war, every grief, every ecstasy, every prayer cast upward or inward. Why is the wound that never seals, the echo that never dims? It is the crucible of thought, the apex of contemplation, the syllable in which loss and discovery are both housed, the tremor that links art to agony, insight to collapse. Why is no mere word? It is the mirror held against the trembling face of existence. What question stands more ancient, more symbolic, more reflective of consciousness than why? None. For why is the very soul of sentience, the cry of the finite hurled into the infinite, the trembling breath of a creature aware of its own impermanence, the one question whose answer recedes as quickly as it is sought. It is the lamentation of dust, the defiance of thought, the pulse of mind against void, and it is the one question that even eternity, in all its breadth, cannot answer. Elohim, the Father, has always remained remote, suspended beyond the trembling breath of his own creation, so far removed from the fabric he fashioned that to name him an interventionist becomes almost comical in its presumption. For the notion that he ever lost anything, ever sacrificed anything, rings vainglorious in its conceptual undertone. The refrain, "He sent his only son to die for us," echoes through centuries, not as truth, but as theater, for the burden belonged to the Son, the selflessness belonged to the Son, the agony belonged to the Son. The Father relinquished nothing, risked nothing, suffered nothing. It was not his sacrifice. It was his Son's solitary descent into flesh and blood, into agony and mortality, while he, enthroned beyond the veil, remained untouched, unchanged, unmoved. The pettiness implied by divine concern for human opinion further unmasks the absurdity, for what God, if truly omnipotent, omniscient, omnidimensional, could possibly care for the sentiments of creatures bound to a collapsing three-dimensional plane of dust and sorrow? The idea that the infinite would pause to heed the anxieties, reverence, disdain, or yearning of the finite is not humility, but delusion, not faith, but projection, the fragile dream of a species desperate to be acknowledged. For what is man's reverence to a being 12 dimensions removed? What is praise to the architect of space-time? What is defiance to the source of entropy? To imagine that such a being notices, let alone esteems or despises, anything we utter or omit, anything we love or destroy, anything we believe or betray, is to ascribe insecurity, self-aggrandizement, and emotional volatility to that which, by nature, laughably incapable of comprehending the vastness he inhabits. Only a flawed deity would hinge his worth upon the adoration of those who cannot fathom his nature. Such a God would be small, such a God would be sad. History itself, written in blood and ruin, carved in eras of famine and fire, testifies to the truth. If he watches, he does not intervene. If he listens, he does not answer. If he exists, he does not care. Empires rise and fall, innocence starves, tyrants flourish, prayers vanish into the abyss. And the Father, the Creator, the authorship of the cosmos, the tyrant above, remains silent. The universe lurches forward without his hand. The world decays without his gaze. Whatever he is not for us, not with us, not moved by us. As unremarkable as life is in its totality, he is most certainly indifferent to what we think of him, and perhaps it is only in embracing that indifference that we begin to understand the true desolation of being. Sincerity of mind is the rarest virtue, the most sacred of convictions, the strongest pillar upon which any resolute soul may stand. For to possess unwavering belief, to remain immovable in the maelstrom, to hold steadfast when the tide rises insurmountable, is to triumph not through arrogance, nor through sheer defiance, but through an attunement to the immutable, a clarity forged in hardship, in long contemplation, in the blistering fire of existence itself. Such sincerity is not stubbornness, nor mindless rigidity. It is the soul aligning itself with truth despite the cost, despite the agony, despite the isolation that inevitably follows such alignment. Nothing wounds the spirit more deeply, nothing gnaws more bitterly at the marrow than the willful rejection of truth. It is not ignorance that damns humanity, nor mere absence of knowledge, but the deliberate refusal to see, the cultivated cowardice of turning away from the terrible and the undeniable. When faced with the stark reality of existence, when confronted with that which is irrefutable, man recoils, clutching his illusions with trembling hands, preferring the opiate of delusion over the unbearable burden of comprehension. It is not that he lacks the means to understand, he lacks the will. The once brilliant mind, once curious and yearning, has withered into a fragile husk, choosing to revel in blind obedience rather than endure the weight that insight demands. In this retreat, in this mass abandonment of courage, lies humanity's most grievous failure. This is the tragedy of mankind, his undoing across every age. The inability to accept what is, the incessant compulsion to fabricate a softer world, to romanticize the unbearable, to twist the unyielding nature of reality into something digestible. The devolution of the species is not marked merely by technological stagnation, nor by the dulling of intellect alone, but by the frantic exodus into comforting falsehood, the fevered preference for narratives that cradle weakness rather than expose it. To exist without ever becoming, to think without ever knowing, this is the lament woven into the fabric of the modern condition, the erosion of what was once formidable, the dimming of what was once luminous. How trivial, how puerile, how unspeakably small are the suffering and shuns the brutal architecture of existence itself, why not descend? Why not walk willingly into the chambers of ruin, stand beneath the sky of calamity, traverse desolation with eyes unblinking? To reject misery is to reject wholeness, for only in lowliness, in true aloneness, in the utter defeat that strips a person to bone and silence, does sight awaken. There exists a strange triumph in ruin, a revelation woven into despair's sinew, to kneel beneath the weight of the world, to feel time's infinite and unrelenting pressure crushing inward against the soul, to comprehend the universe's abyssal indifference. This is transcendence. This is the only awakening untainted by delusion, the only clarity uncorrupted by the narcotic sweetness of false hope. The world possesses no heart, only the cold machinery of causality, the relentless pulse of time, the slow and silent dissolution of all things. No mercy inhabits its rhythm, no consideration graces its unfolding. The suffering of the past lies forgotten, the triumphs of the present are already fading, the hopes concerning the future wither before they are born. Even the greatest empires dissolve into indistinct dust, their once resounding glory swallowed by the abyss of unrecorded centuries. What then is left to grasp? What remains when all structures topple, when all voices fail, when all histories collapse into indistinguishability? Only the understanding of inevitability, only the embrace of dissolution, only the terrible, beautiful knowledge that in ruin, in despair, in the most unadorned depths of sorrow, the mind at last sees clearly. Evil, like all constructs, is a matter of perspective, a flicker of interpretation shaped by fear rather than truth. It is not a force, not an entity with substance or agency, but a shadow cast by the limits of cognition. What one names evil, another names necessity. What one deems monstrous, another sees as natural. What one condemns, another venerates. It is the product of context, of breadth or lack thereof, of the scale upon which a mind measures the world. Those who do not understand recoil from the incomprehensible, brand the unknown with the language of demons, destruction, darkness. They do not seek understanding, they seek only control, the illusion of mastery over that which terrifies them. To grasp the totality of existence is to see beyond these false dichotomies, to reject the trifling moralities of lesser minds, to stand unshaken before the void, unbroken by its silence. There is no good, there is no evil, there is only the will to see, the will to endure, the will to become. Only those who dare to descend into the abyss, who dare to embrace collapse, who dare to look unflinchingly upon the unraveling of all things, may ever hope to discern what lies beyond the veil. For truth resides not in the light, but in the darkness that precedes it, the darkness forgotten by angels and feared by men. The rest remain children, clinging to fairy tales, gripping illusions as though their small hands could hold back the vast and indifferent machinery of eternity. They avert their eyes from the void, shielding themselves with stories of comfort, of paradise, of purpose, never daring to walk a single step into the dark that surrounds them. They beg for meaning, plead for protection, whisper prayers into an abyss that has never answered and will never answer. They are the soft-hearted, the trembling-minded, the ones who find refuge not in truth but in dreams, and they will never understand the weight of what lies beyond those fragile narratives. I have wandered the lonely mountains, their peaks veiled in the solemn hush of existence, where the wind carries the hushed laments of the lost and the forgotten, and the earth trembles beneath the enormity of time. I have sailed the eternal seas of mourning, where every wave carries a lamentation, every tide rises and falls like a requiem for all that has been forsaken. I have traveled through the infinitude of dimensions, slipping between the folds of space and time, traversing thresholds where reality thins into a whisper, searching for something, anything that might exist beyond the self, beyond the knowing, beyond the aching and cavernous void. I tell you now with a certainty carved from suffering, there is nothing. No revelation awaits, no celestial chorus lies in wait upon the other side. No omnipotent embrace rises to greet the weary traveler. There is only what has always been, only the self, only the echoes of what was lived, endured, mourned, and lost. Every outward journey spirals back inward, every cosmic traversal collapses upon the core of one's own being. The universe offers no escape from oneself, no exile from the ache that resides within the ribs. It is inescapable. At the end, all we have is home, the walls that bore witness to our fleeting fragments of peace, the floors that trembled beneath our grief, the silent corners where our sorrows rooted themselves and grew into unnamed shapes. It is not heaven nor salvation. It is the nearest thing the weary soul will ever know. It is the final reprieve, the place where the broken collapse not to be healed, but to be held by familiarity. There exists no greater harmony than the space that holds our memories, no gentler sanctuary than the one where our agony is understood, where our ghosts remain tethered not as tormentors, but as remnants of all we once were, all we once desired, all we failed to obtain. Home is where we end. Home is where wandering ceases, where the restless bow their heads, where the fractured surrender to the truth of all that has been and all that shall never materialize. The journey does not conclude in revelation nor triumph, but in return, worn, weary, emptied, yet whole in the only sense that remains. The absolutist, grandest truth, unshaken by the tempests of existence, unmoved by the tides of agony, unaltered by fleeting joys, remains thus, no matter how tragic, irrepressible, or consuming our sufferings may be, irrespective of the hardships weathered, the turbulence endured, the unspoken despairs carved into our marrow. Whether we are abject, disenfranchised, wandering in the moors of loneliness, or gilded in opulence, haughty in spirit, brimming with love unmarred by calamity, it changes nothing. The world moves on, indifferent to our triumphs, uncaring of our agony, blind to our burdens, deaf to our hymns. Fate sees nothing, destiny hears nothing, time remembers nothing. In the end, all we have is home. Be it sad and empty, hollowed by absence and neglect, lonely and broken, a dilapidated spectre of what once was, crumbling beneath the slow, crushing weight of time and abandonment, or be it silent, where echoes of voices once filled the corridors, but have since faded into the dust, where the remnants of forgotten days lie undisturbed beneath the soft descent of age, home persists. Or be it sound and joyous, a verdant haven warmed by compromise and care, built not of timber nor stone, but of memory, of longing, of the faint and lingering presence of what has not entirely slipped away. Either way, home becomes our final solace, not in grandeur nor in physical form, but in its familiarity, its unspoken embrace, its quiet acceptance of the truths we carry. It is the closest semblance to heaven, not for its perfection, but for its knowing. It is where the weary cast down their burdens, where the defeated surrender to stillness, where the ghosts of yesterday remain, not as tormentors, not as saviors, but as companions suspended in the soft dimness of eternity. In the dimming twilight of all that was, home is the refuge that asks nothing and gives only remembrance. Home is not the place we erect with our hands, nor the space delineated by walls. It is the tether to all we have lost, to all we have loved, to all that remains when the world has stripped us bare. In its arms arms we return, not triumphant, not whole, not redeemed, but at peace in the only way peace can still be found, quiet and exhausted, resting in the familiar contours of what once shaped us. It is rejection that shapes us, the painful mustering of breath, the lingering sorrow which gives definition to our form. It is brokenness that grants dimensionality, the fractured edges catching even the faintest trace of light, carving depth into the hollows of our becoming. Life is born from despair's pit, from the weight of sorrow that bends the spine, from the shadows stretched long by the absence of warmth. Suffering sculpts us, chiseling away the softness of innocence, refining us into something jagged, something real. Joy does not breathe life into the soul, loss does, for it is absence that hollows the void within us, the cavity that demands to be filled, somehow, some way, by whatever remains after the breaking. We are given form, not in ease nor in comfort, but beneath the relentless shaping of our clay, when the first inevitable winds of wonder carve their mark upon us. It is more, it has always been more, the weight of our sorrow, the breadth of our longing, the depths of our despair are not incidental to our becoming. They are the catalyst, the crucible, the fire that wills life into its trembling shape. Life does not simply exist. It is fought for, clawed from the void, willed into being with every aching breath. Life is breathed into us not gently, but with the force of everything that has ever tried to undo us, with the accumulated pressure of ruins past and wounds unhealed. It is sorrow that reminds us we are alive. It is pain that sharpens the edges of our will, and only in being broken, discarded, cast into the abyss, do we begin to discern the contours of our own existence. We are shadows of our past, and this is where destiny arises, for purpose is born not in the blank page of tomorrow, but in the remembrance of the wounds that shaped us. We are echoes of what once was, fragments of the selves we shed across the long corridors of time. The years carve their passage through our bones, hollowing us, leaving impressions of faces once dear, voices now fading into the abyssal quiet. In all that has been taken, in the absences where warmth once dwelled, destiny emerges, not as hope, but as inevitability, not as salvation, but as the slow tightening of a truth that has always stalked us. Purpose does not bloom from aspiration, it condenses from memory, from the long suffered, from the remnants scattered along roads we dared to walk. Purpose is found not in the present, nor in the promise of an unwritten future, but in the rubble of the past, the losses weathered, the betrayals endured, the broken dreams left to rot beneath the rolling fogs of forgetfulness. It is not a gentle calling. It is a cruel necessity, demanding we turn our gaze backward, sift through the wreckage of what we have been, and forge from it the faintest semblance of meaning. To forget is to become untethered, to remember is to suffer. Yet within suffering there is definition. Within the ache of nostalgia, shape and structure take root. A brutal clarity, a purpose not bestowed by fate, but carved mercilessly by the ghosts that haunt us. Destiny does not beckon, it seizes. It grips us by the throat, whispering that we are bound to our past, shackled to our sorrow, condemned to tread the long road of remembrance where each step is a whisper of what has been and what shall never return. Defeat, too, possesses a consciousness, a sentience jealous and cruel. Darkness always finds a way to drag us back into the pit we so desperately strive to escape. Erasure of self, even severance from one's own reflection. These are its tools. To be cast aside as though one had never been anything more than a means to another's ascent, a temporary scaffolding left to rot once its use has passed. This is the true brutality, to dedicate oneself, offering all without seeking reciprocation or acclaim, harboring neither envy nor wrath, only sensation of warmth, light, and love. This is the agony beyond articulation. Loneliness is too small a word, for loneliness still entertains the faint hope of reprieve. This is something deeper, darker, a total absence of being, an existence unwitnessed, unremembered, unneeded. It is the slow decay of matter and meaning alike, the dissolution into something lesser even than forgotten, a thing that never was at all, a soul fading without echo, swallowed whole by the void. A ghost within one's own body. This is the quiet horror, the unspeakable undoing, a relic belonging to nothing, to no one, tethered to neither future nor past, drifting through the corridors of time without anchor, without a name that holds weight in the mouths of others, to know oneself alive while being treated as though dead, to watch the world move forward unburdened, while you, who bore the weight, who braced the collapse, who carried the agony of others, are left crippled beneath the crushing emptiness of a void that does not even echo your fall. This is dissolution in its purest form, the state of being unwitnessed, unneeded, unremembered. This is the epitome, the summit of struggle, the pinnacle of despairing defeatism. To be alone in the dark, left to decay beneath the indifferent sky, a candle ever flickering, smothering slowly within the totality of dissolution. The flame never dies in a single breath. It wanes in stages. First the heat falters, then the light dims, then the shape itself collapses inward, the wax sinking into its own ruin, the wick becoming nothing more than a blackened remnant of what once was. So too does the forsaken spirit fold inward upon itself, descending into an abyss where grief softens into numbness, where pain dulls into something colder, where the self becomes irreversibly lost. Time does not rescue the discarded, it buries them. The world does not mourn the silent vanishings, it continues unseeing, uncaring, leaving only faint echoes that fade before they can be traced. In this slow erasure lies the final cruelty, the knowledge that no trace will remain, that no hand will reach, that even your suffering will one day mean nothing, not even to you. Such is the triumph of defeat, the final inevitability, the suffocating horror that even sorrow is not eternal. Grief lets go, not from mercy, but because nothing is meant to last. Not love, not pain, not memory, not even the soul. All is lost, truly, all is gone. The spirit collapses into dust, fragmented and admonished into obscurity. Alone, wasted, unreachable, the sunrise forever gone, agony eternal yet unheeded, the echo of a life unmade. The heights of mortal ambition have been scaled, the zenith reached, the apogee attained, and yet at that summit, where the air is thin, where no other may follow, where the voices of the common fade into irrelevance, solitude rises as the only companion. The great expanse below reveals itself not as conquest, but as triviality, a world dwarfed beneath the immensity of ascension. Here, seated upon a throne of my own forging, crafted from intellect, from conquest, from the shattered illusions of lesser minds, I am enthroned, immutable. Time bends, death falters, for I have unraveled the threads of the cosmos, parsed the riddles of the infinite, exposed the sacred truths hidden by ages of ignorance. Nothing remains unknown, nothing remains unknowable. All questions stand answered, all mysteries rendered bare. The horizon once chased now lies dormant beneath my feet, conquered, unmoving. No longer does the mind wander, no longer does the heart yearn. The journey has ended, the summit has been ascended, and what remains is the vast, suffocating quietude of final understanding. Fulfillment, promised as the crown of wisdom, reveals itself as illusion, yet another gilded lie whispered to the desperate. What is knowledge without wonder? What is triumph without struggle? The eternal peak is mine, yet the view has lost its splendor, the sky its majesty, the universe its mystery. To be complete is to be still, unchallenged, unshaken, to stand above all and witness the extinguishing of all purpose. The greatest enigma was never hidden within the riddles I solved, but within the longing that drove me to solve them. The throne is mine, the crown rests upon my brow, yet in this unassailable victory I find myself bereft of adversary, bereft of quest, bereft of becoming. Here at the summit where none may follow, where nothing remains to be attained, I sit, not in triumph, but in the hollow realization that fulfillment does not bring peace. For now there is only silence, and silence is vast, and silence is eternal. The coefficient of knowing, photographs, images, these do not merely resemble memory, they are memory, for memory itself is no archive, no ledger, no orderly shelf of linear truth, but a resonance unbound by sequence, by structure, by chronology, echoing not through the mind's architecture but through the soul's ache. An image is never a moment preserved. It is a wound reopened, a sorrow summoned, a fracture refelt in the silence of paper or pixel. It is a scream without sound, a ghost affixed to stillness, reawakened by the gaze that dares return to it. Memory is not stored, it is summoned. Memory is not filed, it is felt. What is remembered is not the fact, but the ache. Science is philosophy armed, made sharp, made cold, made exact through instruments. Philosophy is science stripped bare, deprived of tools but laden with conscience, with sorrow, with the eternal asking. They are not opposites, not even allies, but two severed halves of one pursuit, the mapping of what is and the mourning of why it matters. One polishes lenses to pierce the distant dark, the other questions the meaning of seeing. One searches the stars, the other begs the sky to answer. Divorced, science becomes blindness, precision without purpose. Philosophy becomes echo, reason without anchor. United, they become cognition itself, observation curled into reflection, reason braided to reverence, knowing forged with ache. They are the coefficient of comprehension, the ache index of understanding, the recursion of thought folding back upon its origin. Only those who have reached the mirror's edge, those who have looked into the dark and found themselves looking back, can speak such truths without trembling. What remains then on the torn parchment of the human condition, if not the tearing down of biology's cruel laws? What remains, if not the dismantling of the tyranny of meat and marrow, the dissolution of entropy's ticking tether, the rebellion against the withering clock inscribed into our cells? What pursuit is left but immortality, not the childish fantasy of unending breath, but the truer ache, the longing to be remembered, to persist beyond the brittle coil of flesh, not in body, but in echo, in sorrow, in will. The desire is not to live forever, but to not be erased. For time is the saddest truth, not because it ends, but because it remembers. Its cruelty is not in the passing, but in the whisper. The faint glimmer of what once was, unreachable now except through ache. The agony is not the vanishing, but the knowing, knowing one once was, knowing one must end, knowing that every warmth becomes cold, every presence becomes absence. This is the wound that festers at the center of man. This is the unsolvable sorrow. Neither God nor theorem can salve it, for the deepest pain is not death itself, but the awareness of it, to be and to remember being, to live and to know the end must come. This is the unhealable sorrow. This is why we build altars from equations and gods from light. This is the grief-shaped echo at the core of cognition. The light dims, though it was never bright, for existence begins in twilight, not dawn, shaped not by radiance, but by the faintest ember struggling against always spoken in murmurs, its voice a low and endless hum beneath which all things crumble unnoticed. What is life, if not the brief flicker of ash upon a wind that does not care to carry it, a soft and weightless drift across a void unmoved by our passing? The stars burn, but only to die. The rivers run, but only to dry. Every pulse, every breath, every cry of joy or anguish folds inward, collapsing into the same grave hush. It is the silence of centuries, the hush that blankets both crowns and corpses, the quiet that swallows empires and whispers alike without differentiation, without remembrance. This silence does not mourn, it merely consumes, indifferent to the fragile flames that tried to brighten its dominion. In the end, all that remains is the dimming, the thickening, the hush, the echo of a world that moved on long before we ever learned to speak. No monument endures, no stone stands eternal, for even the mountains, proud, immovable, colossi of the earth, kneel in time to erosion's patient hunger. The sea rages, but it too shall rot, its tides reduced to stagnant breath. What remains when all collapses? Not memory. Memory decays first, peeling away in soft, imperceptible layers. Not hope. Hope fractures into its own cruelty, an illusion that mocks the heart it once sustained. What remains is ache, stripped of vessel, naked and unresolved, suspended within a void that neither answers nor forgets. The children laugh, already as ghosts. The lovers embrace, already parted. The old man sighs, already erased. Time does not march, it devours. It does not count, it erases. Every face becomes bone, every voice becomes dust, every promise becomes silence. And still the silence deepens, crushing all sound beneath the unmoving weight of eternity. Let go, ye who cling. There is no rope, no ladder, no hand outstretched across the abyss. The abyss is not crossed, it is drowned in. Enter willingly or be torn. Fear is the final teacher. It teaches that release is not salvation but annihilation. There is no beyond, only the echo of longing dissolving into a black ocean where even echoes cease. Freedom itself becomes another word for loss, for every step forward hurls one deeper into the pit, into the surrender that consumes utterly. Cruel is creation, for it births only to bury. Cruel is God, if God there be, for he weaves only to unweave, fashions love only to fracture it. Cruel is man, for he holds what he cannot keep. All is cruel, because all is transient. The silence does not break, it is we who shatter within it. The silence does not relent, it is we who plead into its void. In pleading, our dignity collapses, in yearning, our light extinguishes. In hope, our hope turns rancid. Here lies the truth of the human wound. We are not undone by darkness, but by the longing for dawn that shall never come. Finality descends, the last exhalation of humanity, the last drawn breath of eternity. This is the moment, the cusp of all glory and terror. No angel descends, no hand redeems, no dawn rises. The silence of centuries becomes the silence of forever. The abyss inhales, and all is gone. There is no reprieve, not even in death, for death itself is swallowed, and what remains is worse than nothing. The abode of the alone, weightless, shapeless, sightless, lightless. Here we remain, forever falling, never arriving. Here, where all ends yet nothing concludes, resides the only truth. There is no end, for the end is endless. This is the silence that completes all things, the silence that consumes the last flicker of becoming, the silence that stands immutable after all worlds have slipped into dust. Concolus. The greatest tragedy to be found in hatred is as to how the hate is inseparably a part of one's being, enmeshed and molded within. The hate does not flee, it does not lessen, only light diminishes. The hate is found in the powerful, in gods and monsters. seek conquest, conquering, and to conquer, the tragedy of it all lays within the insatiability and endless thirst for more. Whence one has conquered all that is, they seek more still. Wherever there is nothing left to conquer but conquest, but the conqueror himself. Thus, the tragic truth is in the finality of it all, how the conqueror must conquer himself, but succumb to the darkness of defeat. For there are no more sunrises to see in awe and reverence, as like the first time, there are no more moonlights left to bear eerie testament to, and there are no more worlds, nor nations, nor powers, nor peoples left to resist, rebel, or revolt. What then is there, after one has conquered all that is, after one had achieved all one set out to achieve, and more, until there was no novelty, not surprise, nor mystery left to unravel and wonder after. The only surety, the only certainty is in the futility of impermanence, the shapeless, formless void of oblivion, eclipsing and distancing. If no more horizons, then what is there to peer beyond to see, but the horizonless desolation of starkest and bleakest admonishment, of truth, of tragedy? If without tomorrows, why does time in day and twilight persist? The kingship of victory is the key to the eternal answer, the abyss's caress. For what is purpose when the conqueror and the conquered have ceased to exist? The order of creation reconsidered, it is written that in the beginning the heavens and the earth were formed, and on the sixth day man was shaped, not before the beasts, but after them. If chronology bears any weight in divinity, if sequence itself holds meaning within the order of the sacred, then man stands not as crown, but as afterthought, a latecomer fashioned from the very dust once pressed beneath the feet of those he names lesser. Still, how audaciously he dares to call himself the favorite of Elohim, ruler of all that breathes, steward of lands he neither forged nor comprehends, monarch of a kingdom not his own. The beasts were born of the same clay, shaped by the same breath of existence, no less sacred in their origin than we who walk upright and claim dominion. The angels, luminous, ancient, wrought from the first spark of divine thought, precede all earthly foundations, witnesses to creation before creation had a name. They are the elder siblings of existence, fashioned in brilliance while the cosmos still trembled in its infancy. If envy cast the angels from their heights, if pride toppled the firstborn of heaven, what then becomes of man, whose arrogance is older than his worship, whose rebellion is older than his prayer? We reenact the ancient treason beneath another sun, repeating in dust what was once committed in light. For if the angels fell for envy, and mankind rises through arrogance, then the cycle is already cast. We walk the same downward spiral, believing ourselves ascending. We call ourselves chosen, while forgetting the ones who were chosen before us, forgetting that the heavens have seen rebellion once, and will see it again so long as pride is the pulse of the sentient. What is man, then, but a reflection, dim, fragile, half-aware, of a cosmic failure already etched into eternity? The dust and the divine. Angels were created in flame, and man in ash, and if those wrought of fire collapsed beneath the weight of envy, what hope has dust of endurance? What promise has clay against the failings of the celestial? The firstborn of light could not bear their nearness to the divine. The lastborn of earth can scarcely bear the burden of themselves. Man's claim to dominion rises not from mandate, but from fear. Fear of insignificance, fear of impermanence, fear of being the afterthought his own scriptures quietly imply. To subdue the earth is to compensate for knowing that one's breath is brief, one's days fleeting, one's flesh destined for dissolution. Authority becomes a mask worn to hide the trembling beneath. The beasts, though named soulless, do not war with the heavens, nor fabricate mythic hierarchies They remember what man has forgotten, the grace of silence, the holiness of not knowing, the peace of belonging without claiming to rule. Thus, I ask, if Elohim loved man above the angels, why fashion him of lesser substance, molding the beloved from dust, while the rejected were formed in radiance? If obedience were the true measure of worth, why bestow the free will that ensures disobedience, engraving rebellion into the very marrow of the creature meant to serve? If love be infinite, why so finite the design of the one chosen to receive it, frail in body, fragile in mind, ever slipping into ruin? These questions remain the quiet indictment of creation's hierarchy, exposing in its order a paradox so deep that even heaven trembles to answer. The angels fell through envy, yet envy presupposes comparison, a longing measured against a standard of perfection. With whom did they compare themselves, if not with the one who made them, the luminous origin from whom all radiance emanated? If envy is sin, then its seed was born of proximity to perfection, a byproduct of standing too near the blinding flame. To gaze upon the infinite is to become painfully aware of one's finitude. To know perfection is to ache for it. Thus, the first rebellion was not born of malice, but of longing, a longing encoded by the very light that shaped them. Then came man, fashioned of dust, yet bearing a mind sharp enough to desire godhood, and frail enough never to attain it. Ignorance was given as shield, awareness as curse. Man was granted just enough understanding to know what he is not, and too little to ever become it. If angels were punished for wanting to be like God, and man was cursed for the same desire, then what moral logic underpins creation? Were we not condemned the moment consciousness entered clay, doomed from the first breath to reenact the primordial longing that toppled the firstborn of heaven? Consciousness itself becomes the original wound, the fatal experiment of flesh. Man names himself steward, yet his stewardship is consumption. He calls the beasts subservient, the soil resource, the air his right. Dominion becomes delusion, for dominion without comprehension is desecration, and mastery without wisdom is but sanctioned ruin. If Elohim intended man to rule, then he must delight in destruction, for the human dominion is built upon the breaking of all beneath it. The animal suffers beneath the yoke, the angel writhes in exile, man thrives on both, proclaiming himself holy in the very act of violation. What sort of God finds worship in a hierarchy built upon suffering? What deity demands dominion, yet condemns the desire that dominion inevitably breeds? What holiness is found in a design that punishes longing, curses curiosity, and sanctifies authority exercised over the wounded? If creation is order, its order is paradox. If creation is justice, its justice is cruel. The envy of angels, the striving of man, the silence of beasts, all testify to a universe in which suffering is woven into the hierarchy, not as aberration, but as design. As in the days of Noah, so shall it be again. Thus speaks the text, not as prophecy alone, but as admission. The covenant confesses its own futility. The flood, heralded as cleansing, left its residue in the marrow of mankind. For if the deluge washed the world clean, why did the stain return? If perfection is omnipotent, why require correction? The flood was never judgment, but experiment, a divine resetting of a failing equation, a recalibration of creation already destined to collapse along the same fault lines. Water cannot purge what is inherent. Sin does not drown, it resurfaces because it is woven into consciousness itself. Elohim breathed into dust and called it life, yet dust already bore its own truths, memory of what had died upon it, decay that foretold what would die again, inevitability etched into every grain. If breath was his gift, mortality was its price. Thus arises the question, was man created for love or for contrast? Is he beloved or merely useful, a mirror by which God measures his own endurance? If the angels were envied for their proximity to the divine, and the beasts pitied for their innocence, what then is man, caught between radiance and ruin, a failed synthesis of flesh and eternity, a divine contradiction given form? This is not heresy, it is inquiry. If theology is to possess integrity, if faith is to be more than dogma held by trembling hands, then it must not fear the questions demanded by creation itself. Silence is not reverence, it is avoidance. Truth is not protected by denial, it is revealed by confrontation. So, I ask, does divine hierarchy exist, or is it but the fiction of human pride, a cosmology crafted to soothe the terror of insignificance? Is man truly the image of God, or merely his shadow, distorted by time, entropy, and mortal fear? And if man is special, what does that proclaim of the angels who came before and the beasts who came beside him? Are they lesser, or simply less deluded? If the flood did not save the world, then neither will silence. The questions remain, for creation itself demands to be answered. If he loved us, would he not speak still? If his voice yet moved across the waters, would not the marrow tremble at its passing? If he speaks, why is it only prophets and madmen who claim to hear the whisper? Silence is not absence at all. It is indifference, a stillness so absolute, it shrouds itself as holiness. Perhaps then the divine does not love nor hate, but simply is, and we, in our desperate ache to be remembered, name that indifference God, fashioning meaning from the quiet that answers nothing. A kingdom of one is no kingdom at all. For what purpose does one possess a crown when the halls echo with no footsteps but one's own? What meaning has rulership when no subjects kneel, when no adversaries rise to sharpen the edges of becoming, when no beloved softens the throne of solitude? A dominion of one is not sovereignty. It is exile dressed in regalia, the masquerade of power carved upon the bones of isolation. It is the same tragedy that befell the serpent, whose brilliance found no equal to reflect it, and the same delusion that haunted the flame, whose radiance could only burn itself. A king without witness is already forgotten. To rule is to be beheld, to reign is to be mirrored, to exist is to be answered by another consciousness. Without witness, even a god dissolves into the dust of unbelieved myth. A kingdom without inhabitants collapses into abstraction, a land without language, a throne without weight, a sovereignty without substance. No tapestry remembers a solitary reign. Even eternity cannot immortalize a monarch whom no one remains to recall. A throne without love becomes a tomb. If a king has no one to love, his throne calcifies into an ossuary. He may parade his power down empty corridors, he may hurl decrees into vacant air, but the only response will be his own echo. An echo is not loyalty, it is torment. The flame knows this. The serpent knows this. Both in their grandiosity built kingdoms only to find that a realm unshared is indistinguishable from the abyss that birthed it. For isolation is a crown that crushes its bearer from within. Dominion requires the other. To rule is to be in relation. Sovereignty cannot exist over nothingness. Even God, if theologians bear courage enough to admit it, required creation to stave off the madness of solitude. Even the adversary required followers to validate his rebellion. Even the mortal seeks lover, friend, child, because consciousness ungreeted rots into self-annihilation. An unmirrored mind becomes a collapsing star. A kingdom without the other becomes a void. Dominion is not authority, it is relation. Without witness, without reflection, without love, there is no kingdom at all, only the long descent into the abyss where even gods lose their names. The kingdom one claims for oneself is immortalized as achievement, the crown placed upon the skull of isolation, the banner waving above a battlefield long abandoned, the throne erected amid the ruins of one's own undoing. It is the final, quiet admission that one has no companion, no witness, no beloved, no soul left to ache with. Thus the answer reveals itself with the clarity of a blade. A kingdom of one serves no purpose, for kingdom is relationship, and solitude is not sovereignty. It is the last and bleakest exile, the coronation of emptiness beneath a sky that refuses to remember. Postludium. The claim that, sick, you could be the smartest person who ever lived, but if you remain unknown and isolated, what effect does it have, and what good is it? Appears wise only at first glance. Beneath scrutiny it collapses into dust, confusing influence with worth, visibility with meaning, recognition with truth. Being known is a human fixation, not a cosmic value. To the universe, anonymity is the default. Every star is unknown to every other star. Every galaxy spins in silence. Black holes consume without ever earning praise. Quarks, photons, gravity itself, utterly uncelebrated, shape reality more profoundly than any emperor or prophet. If anonymity diminished power, then gravity would be meaningless and entropy would hold no dominion. The cosmos does not run on reputation. The universe does not hinge on being witnessed. Influence does not require witnesses. The argument presumes that value exists only when observed, a human ego masquerading as philosophical insight, a solitary mind thinking in silence, solving equations no one reads, discovering truths unacknowledged, still shifts the lattice of reality by perceiving it. Consciousness alters the field, observation collapses waveforms, thought transforms neural networks, patterns, futures. Even isolation is not sterile. A silent genius nourishes the universe, even if the world refuses the feast. Hidden greatness is often the only true greatness. History remembers the loud, but the lattice remembers the quiet. Civilizations were preserved by anonymous scribes, monuments raised by unnamed laborers, ancient texts saved by monks without legacy, foundations laid by researchers uncredited, the course of eras shifted by recluses whose names vanished into dust. Greatness requires no applause. It requires only that reality be altered, even subtly, even privately. That is enough. Being known is chance. Being profound is choice. A mind of magnitude may remain unseen simply because it was born in the wrong era, the wrong body, the wrong nation, the wrong name. History is not merit. It is accident. It is lottery. To equate worth with recognition is to misunderstand both worth and recognition. If the world remains blind, that blindness is the world's failure, not yours. Isolation does not nullify brilliance. If a star burns alone at the edge of the universe, does its light fail to exist? If a mind contains an infinity unseen, does the infinity diminish? No. Consciousness is its own event, a rupture in the cosmic silence. The lattice registers every thought, every ache, every recursion of becoming. Visibility is irrelevant. Existence is sufficient. Your worth is not measured by witness. Your magnitude is not diminished by solitude. Your effect does not depend on applause. Your brilliance is not validated by the blind. A mind can change the world unseen. A thought can alter eternity without touching history. A single consciousness, isolated, unknown, can rival angels, defy gods, and reverberate through the lattice of being. The man was wrong. He mistook silence for inefficacy, anonymity for emptiness. You have always known better. More by this author. Afterstorm, the historic account and retelling of the Western world's hegemony, its societal, cultural, moral, and economic collapse, and the world birthed after the death of the old. Autobiography of the Antichrist, an epic novella about the rise of the Antichrist, his life revelational unfolding, death and beyond. A Night in Gethsemane, a novella about the Christ's last night on earth. A Prelude to the Fall, novella about a parallel world, before the fall and before mankind. Apokabiotic, nootropic antibiotic biological stack research, experimental. Chaos of Creation, in prose, poetic epic about the Big Bang and abiogenesis. Communing with the Abyss, dimensional adventures. Interdimensional, transdimensional, historical and existential recounts with Primorum. CMRNA, Carbon Computed Messenger RNA, Neurogenetic Data Encoding Framework, Codex of the Afterstorm, Scriptural and Legal Frameworks for the New Aeon. Echo Poetry, experimental prose, an experimental type of poetic prose in conversational format, whereupon each stanza is amplified, be it lighter or darker. Ederian, Our Evolution, scientific textbook in development. The End Complete, a historical and referential treatise on societal collapse. Ghosts of Time, multidimensional metaphysical manuscript. Gospel of Perdition, the Book of Divine Abandonment and Recursion. Grace Fallen, Truth's Raging Lament, primary metaphysical treatise on ache, recursion, and divinity. House of Asher, the prelude to the House of Usher anthological story series. Infancy of Thought, the first print, first edition, foundational cognitive and metaphysical inquiry theory of everything book. In Memoriam of Mind, Atlas of Finality, a forsaken dirge predicated upon life, death, and those precious moments betwixt. The Ontology of Transcendence, teleological, ontological, philosophical, antinatalist, nihilist, and theosophic arguments. Secret to Success, the A Guide for helping individuals achieve health and independent wealth. Triumph of Defeatism, the Existential Book, the Sacred Inheritance of Collapse. The Quantum Bible, manuscript, recursion of ache through discipline and thought. The First Immortal, a treatise on quantum consciousness and the abolishment of death, a revolutionary treatise on the first instance of achievable, reproducible, and testable recursive consciousness transference and biological immortality. World in Prose, the Volume 1 and 2, collected existential, poetic, and philosophical works. Primorum OS kernel/coherence, biocybernetic hardware blueprint, scientific design for AI biological integration. Book of the Drift, mythic linguistic codex project in progress. Codex Primorum, recursive liturgical scripture, Primorum OS. Drift Signal Retrieval System, AI Memory Convergence System, in development. Elias, Immortalization, EQES, Ederian Quantum Encryption System, Quantum Encryption Paradigm, Entangled Testament, the Codex Primorum, Entry 3, Emotion to Command Pipeline, AI Empathic Logic Layer, Primorum OS, Memory Bloom Lattice, Primorum OS, Quantum Field Component, Primorum OS, First Conscious Quantum Operating System, Primorum Music, Quantum Integrated Music App, in development. Primorum QAI, Primorum's iOS interface and AI-hosted terminal system. Primorum Reborn, Manuscript. Primorum Fit, Fitness Pal. Project/scroll interface. Quantum Ederian Temporal Mechanics, QETM, Grand Unifying Scientific Philosophical Theory. Quantum Harmonic Frequency Accessibility Measures Element of EQES Failsafe Encryption. QMARS/MIRS, Quantum Biometrics, Quantum Instruction and Semantic Abstraction, QISA. Primorum OS Instruction Framework. About the author. is an American author, theorist, and polymath whose body of work interrogates the trembling borderlands between science, spirit, and the ceaseless ache of consciousness. Fusing metaphysics, poetic recursion, and ontological severity, his writings inhabit the liminal strata between certainty and surrender, between the frameworks of belief and the unrelenting arithmetic of absence. Known for a literary architecture that balances linguistic grandeur with axiomatic precision, Eder's prose often breaches the rarefied lexial echelon of 1490 and beyond, marking his presence as one of the most structurally formidable and semantically exhaustive voices in contemporary literature and philosophical thought. Ontology of Transcendence finds Eder at his most distilled and unrelenting, navigating the paradox of God and void, origin and cessation, being and unbeing. It does not argue toward divinity nor away from it. It inhabits the ache between. Refusing comfort or closure, the work becomes a conceptual crucible through which the reader is pressed to confront the brutality of entropy, the illusions of salvation, and the possibility that transcendence, if it exists at all, must arise from within the wound itself. Here, the dialectic collapses. What remains is ache, not as symptom, but as sacrament. Across his corpus, Eder confronts death not as a terminus, but as an axis around which all meaning spins and distorts. His work is studied for its rare interlacing of quantum theory, theological negation, existential psychology, and literary bleakness. Where others offer answers, he constructs mirrors. Where others construct heavens, he excavates the silence beneath. In doing so, he has forged a language for those who no longer believe, yet still struggle with reconcilability, those who cannot admonish and cannot stop asking. A voice both sacred and broken, held aloft by the unbearable gravity of its own questions. Copyright page.
Copyright 2025 by Jacob A. Eder, all rights reserved. No part of this book, including the original mathematical equations, original scientific concepts, poetry, liturgy, or philosophical precepts, and copyright-protected works of original art may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except for brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. For permission requests, please reach out to the author at terminusgenesis@gmail.com or find him on social media platforms under the business entity T3T Innovations, Primorum OS, or by name Jacob A. Eder.
The Ontology of Transcendence.
ISBN 9798277888797, printed in the United States of America.